Now I'll call us to order. And if we could start with a roll call, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Commissioner Meyer? Here. Commissioner Pope? Here. Commissioner Wallace?
Here.
Commissioner Naves?
Here.
Commissioner Revel?
Excused?
Commissioner Gordon?
Excused?
And Chairman Racinas.
Here.
Madam Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Okay, well, welcome, everyone. I think we have a pretty robust agenda today, so let's hop right in.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Can do. So for my quick announcements, agendas and sign-in sheets are outside of the room. If you are here in person, please do fill those out. And then for our disclaimer, key decisions pertaining to the Wyoming Stable Token Initiative will be made by the commissioners of the Stable Token Commission or the state legislature in public meetings such as this. Further, the only commissioners are those appointed by statute, the governor, or a majority vote of the commission. At this time, Wyoming stable tokens are not available for purchase. Prototype tokens with no backing reserves and therefore no financial value have been issued on test nets for the Ethereum, Solana, Avalanche, Arbitrum, Base, Optimism, and Polygon blockchains. These are for testing purposes only, and smart contract addresses are published on our website. As such, any website or platform claiming to sell or distribute Wyoming stable tokens should be considered fraudulent. Please do not attempt to purchase tokens from unauthorized sources. Information outside these public meetings should only be considered factual and legitimate if it is distributed through our official channels. At this time, those are limited to our website at stabletoken.wyo.gov, the Wyoming legislature website at wyoleg.gov, and our social media channels with the @WyoStable username on Twitter, YouTube, GitHub, and Warpcast. And with that, Madam Chairman, I can quickly review our agenda for the day and take it from there.
Proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So, as Madam Chairman mentioned, we do have a bit of a full agenda today. We have some meeting minutes from our prior meetings to go through. We'll go through the monthly budget review for the month ending June 30th. And then I'll provide, rather than a kind of broader news update, I'll talk through some of the ongoings of Crypto Week in DC, as it has been titled, and then provide a verbal update on our plan for launch. We'll then discuss the pilot program. What we've couched in that is the smart contract redeployment that our team has done in conjunction with Fireblocks and Layer Zero. I will demonstrate, which I think may be a first time a state does something like this, but I'll demonstrate the capabilities of sending a Wyoming stable token from one wallet to another and the fees and the efficiencies therein. And then we'll also give it a shot to do some bridging. I'm a little concerned about the Wi-Fi down here, but we'll see where we get. We're then going to invite two of our pilot programs to do demonstrations of using the Wyoming stable token on their blockchain-enabled platforms. That'll be with John Belitsky, the founder and CEO of Hashfire, and then Marco Rubel, the founder and CEO of Fundora. Moving on from there, we'll quickly go through the blockchain selection exercise for Q2 of this year. Because it's the second month in that quarterly process, this one will be a little faster. And then we'll move on to our rulemaking update. There'll be a quick review of where we are with the Wyoming Public Records Act, the procurement rules and reserves management, and then we'll segue into some of the deeper conversations around some of the policies and rules we're looking to get in front of the commission today. In that instance, that'll be the token management rules. We'll then go into the policy update. And again, this is called the inventory of documents that we think at a minimum we'll need in place ahead of launch. We'll go through what all those are. We went through these at a super high level our last regular meeting, just to say we kind of introduced what these are and what they're looking to accomplish, and then gave you a very early work in progress draft version. Those have been significantly updated since. We'll go through them not clause by clause, but we'll go through them perhaps section by section or chapter by chapter to give the commission an idea of where we're going with all these docs. We are not going to look to approve those today. We do need, I think, a little bit more time for the commission to get familiar with some of these and ask any final questions. We do want to make sure we have a hybridization pass in which we look at all these things together and make sure that we don't have one clause in the 40th page of one schedule affecting something in the definitions of another. But the goal would be for us to leverage the existing August 4th meeting we have for final approvals. Perhaps we'll talk about extending that a bit because it's an hour and we may be able to get through that one too. But then we'll go through some of the next steps, upcoming events, and then public comment. So it is a bit of a full docket, Madam Chairman, so I'm happy to move into the meeting minutes as you see fit.
Great. I'd say if there's no concerns or questions about the agenda, I'd say,
Madam Chairman.
go ahead.
I would move approval of minutes for May 30th, 2025, July 2nd, 2025, and June 19th, 2025.
Is there support for the treasurer's motion?
Second. Got a comment?
Sure, go ahead.
I'm just wondering if there's an error where it shows Chairman Gordon was excused, but then it shows present on the May 30th. And then on the June 19th, it shows Commissioner Meyer was excused, but then it shows him present as well.
I think both those were, I think Governor Gordon was here, then he left. Is that right, the last one?
So through the chair, to be clear, on the May 30th meeting, the treasurer is correct that the governor, in his capacity as chairman, was here through the majority of the executive session that we had, and then departed about halfway through that executive session, and the auditor completed that chairmanship for us. So I'm looking at page 1, everyone was there. Commissioner members excuse are NA because everyone was present to begin with.
Okay.
Are you looking at the tail end of this?
On the June 19th?
I'm sorry, I thought we were on May 30th.
Okay. Yeah, no, I was just looking at that second paragraph that showed excused, and that must have been where he exited.
Yeah, I think you had roll call while I was walking in the door, and then when I got here, and I think the record was, shown that everybody was present. I recall on that one.
Yeah, so I think the point that Commissioner Wallace is making is that while we were inventorying everybody at the bottom of the page, in the second paragraph on the top,
Right.
it should say that Chairman Gordon was there as well, before Commissioner Racines and Pope, and everyone was attended in person. I'm happy to make that edit.
Commissioner Wallace, could I maybe interpret that as a motion to amend both of those to correct those?
Yes, please.
Okay. Is there a second to that?
I'd second.
Okay. All in favor of the amendment? Say aye.
Aye.
Okay, then we're back on the main motion to approve all 3 sets of minutes. Are there any other comments, questions, concerns? Thank you for that catch, Commissioner Wallace. We're all coming in hot and leaving early or late occasionally, so that happens. Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, motion carries. We'll move on to the budget review.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So moving right into the budget review, you'll have, again, the 2 big pieces of paper in front of you. The one that's a little less colorful is the summary detail. To speak through some of the notes on this, as usual, the predominant driver month to month can just be the team and salaries. A couple of things we want to highlight as we go down the stack here. There was travel in May that was captured in June, which is the $3,346 charge there. That involves Deb, Joe, and Keith, so our Chief Risk and Compliance Officer, Chief Financial Officer, and Chief Information Security Officer, respectively, attending the Global Blockchain Business Council meeting in DC, where Deb was a speaker, and also Joe and Keith's travel to Consensus in Toronto. That was all captured in June, although the travel happened in May. There is a fee for $60 here in kind of this catch-all bucket of communications fees and advertising. Just to let the team know and the commissioners know, that is Stephanie's licensing fee for becoming a notary. So now have that capability kind of in-house. If anyone needs anything notarized, just let us know. There is a highlight, so almost skipped one there. So it got, just the way we consolidate this, it got brought into hardware and software, but there's a significantly larger charge there of $10,772. That reflects the USPTO filings that we did for all of our trademarks around the Wyoming staple token and the names that we may or may not use going forward. We haven't pushed those public yet, but those have been filed with the USPTO. And we've also done those filings with the Secretary of State's office as well for all of our protections. There is one highlighted item as a telecom charge. I highlight that because that is a charge we are actively disputing. It's a significantly large fee, about $1,200 associated with my mobile plan during my time abroad in Europe. We had requested an international plan that would cover that for about $100. For whatever reason, that plan was misapplied. Rather than putting Europe down, I was put on a Mexico and Canada plan. So we are pushing back on that, and I would expect that to be removed in our next review of the monthly budget. And then looking at the professional services, we have a large item there for attorney services. Again, that is Paul Hastings. That is admittedly both the April and May charges hitting in June. So that was kind of stacking up 2 for 1 in the month of June. To go through kind of the high level detail here. So we are now halfway through the biennium. So we're about through with fiscal year 2025, at least from my perspective. The auditor may have a different idea on what constitutes a fiscal year being done. But for us, through the first 12 months, we have spent $1,062,730 out of a budget of $5.8 million. So we've spent less than 20% of the total budget available to us so far. We continue to keep a very tight leash on all this, again, as we move forward towards launch and more of the vendors start, picking up a monthly cadence with us. There will be a higher burn rate, but until we have to spend the money, we have been good custodians of that. And just another kind of view of it, if we've spent 1.06 million, that means we have a remaining budget of $4,737,270 for the remainder, or about just north of 80% of the total budget we've been allocated for 50% of the biennium. If you were to go over to the detail, the only thing I would call out there is, again, we have that line item. It's $10,400 in intangible trademarks. That got wrapped into hardware and software on the summaries. I'll take a look at that. Those are new line items, so I think they may have got captured in the formula that way, but we may want to separate that out and put that in a more applicable bucket, at least for our own tracking. But beyond that, I am happy to answer any questions the commission might have regarding our finances or spend to date.
Any questions regarding the monthly budget review? Director, the $1 million that's obligated in total in attorney services?
Yep.
Is that's not all for Paul Hastings, is it? Or?
Madam Chairman, that is the fully allocated amount. We don't have to spend all of it.
Gotcha. Okay. That's just where it's plopped
Parked,
for now.
correct.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So go ahead and proceed with the industry update.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So this week it was announced as Crypto Week in DC by the House Republicans, which is intended to mean there was a push to get several key pieces of digital asset legislation through in Washington. These would be the Genius Act, which is the stablecoin act we've been talking about for the last several months. That had made it over from the Senate to the House as part of this push to get the bill through. There was essentially the House had been working on the Stable Act. There was kind of this tacit agreement the Stable Act would be kind of tabled, and there would be kind of a joint adoption of the Genius Act and bring that forward. The Clarity Act, which is the broader market structure bill being drafted in the House, and then the Anti-CBDC Surveillance State Act. So these are the 3 big bills that we're looking to get pushed forward by the current administration, and as well as some bipartisan leadership in the lead up. I did give you this memo that was very kindly drafted and presented to me from our legal externs who've been tracking all this. Obviously, we've got a lot of balls in the air, so having a couple extra eyes on everything that's happening in DC has been very helpful. And I'm happy to go through some of the back and forth on that, including initially failed cloture votes. There was about 12 or 13 Republicans that went over the other side of the vote and prevented these from passing the key procedural advancements that were required on both the Genius and the Clarity Act, as well as the Surveillance State Act. And the rationale for that lack of support was there was a number of Republican representatives that wanted the anti-CBDC provision to be consolidated with the Genius Act or the Clarity Act so that it wouldn't get kind of pushed off, and we would make sure that everything gets packaged into one bill that would get put forth. That continued to be some back and forth, and then it was late last night, after the longest vote in House history, that things turned around and the House of Representatives voted 217 to 212 on House Resolution 580 to move all these things forward through the procedural votes. So the expectation is that after all the back and forth, the Genius Act is scheduled for a vote today. I'm not sure exactly what time that would be, but that is my understanding. A vote on the Clarity Act is anticipated to be scheduled for next week. And then the Anti-CBDC Act will be attached to the National Defense Authorization Act, which is understood to be must-pass legislation. And that will appease the dissenters in the Republican Party that had not supported these bills going forward. So again, these are all procedural votes. This is similar to what happened with the Genius Act the first time around when there was a floor vote on it, or rather a procedural vote on it. But they've been able to whip things into shape over there and move forward. So again, a lot of moving parts. And again, I want to thank our legal team, some of whom will join us here today, for getting all this my way while we've been heads down some of the other documents. So happy to answer any questions about that.
Madam Chairman, what's the, I guess, the hurdle that in the Anti-CBDC Surveillance Act as far as getting access to it? Is it going to be a FISA court thing? Is it going to be something else like that? Because FISA court really doesn't work that well. Just wondering what, the mechanism in that, if you do know.
So through the chair, Commissioner Meyer, hopefully I'm answering this correctly, but I think the anti-CBDC bill is even a little, the concerns are a little less specific than that. I think the concerns are a little less specific. The concerns are very general, which is people don't want the federal government kind of surveilling every transaction they have with the ability to do things like interdiction. That's kind of the long and short of it. And again, the opposition was, we want there to be an anti-CBDC provision in one of these bills that would pass immediately, rather than something that may get punted along. It's after the August recess. We don't know if that's going to make it back in. So now that it's been bolted onto the NDAA, as they call it, the National Defense Authorization Act, there's a higher probability that there will be an anti-CBDC bill put forth in DC. I will call out, lest I be the person working on a stable token for a public entity that is talking about CBDCs and the opposition thereof, I will note that Wyoming, during the most recent legislative session, did pass its own anti-CBDC bill, the CBDC prohibition bill, that did two critical things. It defined what a CBDC is, and then essentially said state agents, if there happens to be one, state agencies can't use them. And again, that was very specific that a CBDC is a federal concept, not something akin to what we're doing, which is, fiat-backed, fully reserved, as opposed to an actual dollar representation that they could just mint on a blockchain.
Yeah, well, somebody's going to try to put a loophole in there. We got to keep our eyes open on what it is.
Absolutely. Through the chair, Commissioner Meyer, we're certainly looking into all of that. Again, I think the biggest thing for us to keep tabs on is what some of the larger banks are doing around things like tokenized deposits, and seeing, if elements of the fractional reserve system start coming into and encroaching on a fully reserved system. I'm interested to see where that goes. Any other questions?
Any other questions? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So next up on our list is a launch update. This will be a quick verbal one. So in terms of contracts, I'd like to let the commissioners know that we have engaged Franklin Advisors for the purposes of investment management. So when those dollars come in for the reserves of the stable token, they'll be the entity responsible for keeping X amount in cash, buying treasuries, rotating repos on our behalf. And I want to thank again the risk team and the Attorney General's office for all the support on that. That is one of these contracts that had many, many attachments and was quite nuanced. So I appreciate all the support we've gotten along the way. We are also, I think we could probably say, about to sign with the network firm for financial audit and attestation. I think that one's locked, loaded, and ready to go. So I would expect that to be done by close of business tomorrow, latest. And then we continue to have a kind of a back and forth with Chainalysis Governance Solutions and Ernst & Young, the former being for on-chain analytics and the latter being for internal controls. Perhaps no hurdles there besides the amount of hours in the day. And we look forward to kind of getting all those all wrapped up. So that's the contractual side of things. I do want to make a couple of updates on our account structure and how we're moving forward in that capacity. To take one step back, when we go through that budget every month like we just did, those are the dollars in our administration account that was statutorily created. It's Fund 204, for whatever that's worth. That's managed by the administration and information team. It's overseen by the auditor's office, and that will continue working as it has for us into the foreseeable future. We have a couple of changes to structure on the trust and reserves side. So we had created, or rather the legislature had created Fund 203 as the trust account. And then we had created Fund 205 as the liquidity fund account. The difference there being the trust account is definitively one-to-one backing of the token for the benefit of a token holder, not our money. And the liquidity fund account, that minimum 2% over collateralization we have to do before we move any money out of there into the operational side, that is our funding, but it's segregated and also managed by Franklin Advisors. So we set those up and had discussed potentially reporting those numbers on a monthly basis into Wolves. However, we have, through some conversations with SAO and the Treasurer's Office, we've determined that perhaps it's best for us to report those numbers as an agency, which we'll go forward doing. Our CFO, Joseph Saldana, has put together the financials for that. You've seen some previews of that along the way. Those amounts that are managed by Franklin will be reported through them. We'll do our own reconciliation on the reserve side, and then we'll reconcile everything in the middle with everything happening in our operations account, which will continue to be managed by the state and in Wolves. So we've got best of both worlds for the foreseeable future. Beyond that, we are also working with the Treasurer's Office to get a segregated sub-account dedicated for the commission through Wells Fargo, where the state is currently operating its general fund. That will allow the commission to have more oversight and internal controls in place when it comes to doing things like monthly reconciliations, the amount of cash that we have, again, vis-a-vis how much we have in reserves versus operations. Again, we want to have as many internal controls in place as possible, as much visibility as possible. And again, we are working towards, we would hope by the end of this year, having things like real-time attestation around the amount of reserves. So anything that brings us closer to that goal, we are moving to do so. And I think we're moving in the right direction on all of this, none of this being a holdup for anything that we're doing. Any questions on any of that? Excellent. And then the last piece of the launch update would be on the technology side. So I will kind of begin segueing into the pilot program. So in terms of the first item on here, which is smart contract redeployment, we have, again, redeployed smart contracts. If you recall, we had them initially deployed via Layer 0 in March ahead of the DC Blockchain Summit, and had Wyoming stable tokens on testnets for 7 different blockchains: Solana, Avalanche, Ethereum, Arbitrum, Optimism, Polygon, and Base. Since then, we've also engaged Fireblocks as our blockchain infrastructure provider. They are now working very closely with the Layer 0 team on a unified infrastructure that would leverage the Fireblocks ERC20F token standard, which is their version of a fairly familiar standard on the Ethereum network, or Ethereum virtual machine. And then on top of that, we have layered on the Layer 0 omni-chain fungible token standard. So it's kind of one unified structure at this point. So we've been working with those teams to get trained up on both systems. Those, again, the contracts are redeployed. The adapters that go between chains are also available. And we continue to work with those teams to do our testing as we move forward. I will then, I'm happy to answer any questions about that, but again, we would expect, I think the last thing I'll mention is we are expecting an audit report on those smart contracts, possibly by the end of this week or early next. So we'll have that in the near future, and we could share those results with the commission. Any questions on that? All right. Well, the next item on here is peer-to-peer transfers and bridging, which is to say, what I'd like to do is share my screen and then demonstrate what it looks like to go from simply one wallet to one digital wallet holding Wyoming stable tokens to another digital wallet that can receive those Wyoming stable tokens and make that transfer and demonstrate that in real time. So I do need to just take a second here to log in because they do log you out of all these things along the way and make sure I can share this. But that is hopefully a quick demo. And then we'll invite some of the pilot programs up to speak their piece about everything they have going on. In the lead up to me getting this all configured, are there any questions from the commission? Is there anyone online with questions? So as I mentioned, I think my main concern here is Wi-Fi more than anything else, but let's give this one more shot. And Steph, as we get this set up, I will quickly ask you, do we have our participants online for the next segment? Excellent, thank you. Okay, this should work. Okay, so I will quickly share my screen here. And we'll give you a quick little lay of the land before we start moving anything around. So what you're seeing here, I will probably need to zoom in a little bit so you can actually see it, is a MetaMask digital wallet on a testnet of the Polygon blockchain, which currently holds the native token on this chain, which is Polygon or POL, Paul. And then there's also in here Wyoming stable tokens. There's no conversion rate available. Again, these are test nets. There's no dollars behind these. We'd expect that to be a dollar denominated amount. But if you were to click on the Wyoming stable tokens, you'd see all the details thereof, and not only the amount that I hold in this wallet, but the network. You could see the smart contract that it's based on. You could see things like spending cap. So if you wanted to limit the amount of money you were able to spend at any given time, you could do that. You could see your transaction history as well. So this wallet here, which is, and sometimes you need to kind of remember these off the top of your head, beginning with E2E and ending in CBA. That's the wallet I'll be using to do a send. And then what I'll do in a different browser with a different MetaMask wallet that hopefully shows up. There we go. This is a demo account as well, which holds a smaller amount of Wyoming stable tokens. This one's got about just over 1,000. What I will do is go to the testing wallet where I have 23,899 Wyoming stable tokens. I will click the send button. I will go to my contact list and select the wallet I'm going to send to, which is the one I have in the other window. And I'm going to put in a number. And I always like to make these odd numbers during demos so that you know when things come through, it's not everything is 1 or 10 or whatnot. So Madam Chairman, do you have a lucky number in mind?
17.
Just 17? Got like a second lucky number? We do some decimals here? Okay, we'll do 17,000. Sure. And then we'll continue. And what this should do is queue up the transaction. You'll see, again, lots of intelligence on this is coming from my wallet, going to the other wallet, the MetaMask Flask, interacting again with the smart contract. So if I wanted to see that, you can recognize it so you know what you're interacting with. The network fee is looking to be less than 1 cent, and the speed is hopefully about 2 seconds. So I will confirm the transaction. It is failed, and we have seen this candidly with transactions that are a little bit larger. So I think we're going to go back to doing just 17, and we'll see if that works, because that seems to have worked in the past. And also I'm on, make sure we're sending the actual Wyoming stable tokens. So that is pending, and it's already confirmed. So our wallet that had 1001 WIST, if we just give that a second to think, by the time we click on it, we already have 1018 Wyoming stable tokens here. So taking a dollar-denominated Wyoming stable token from one digital wallet, account, whatever you want to call it, sending it to another, took us about 3 seconds, 5 seconds. And if we were to look at the transaction detail, which because everything on these chains is auditable in real time, what I can do is view this on the Block Explorer, which is where you'll see all of your data about a given transaction. Again, this is A, small, and B, a little bit inscrutable. But this is where you can see your transaction hash, which is your unique, essentially, receipt of your transaction. You can even see what block on the blockchain this transaction was appended into. You'll see that it was from your wallet, again, ending in CBA, to the wallet ending in 7CCF, which is, again, our wallet on the other side of things. Bring that back up, 7CCF. And if you look at the transaction fee was 0.005 POL, which is, again, the Polygon native token. So if you would assume the Polygon native token is at about 25 cents, where I believe it is now, this transaction cost me 0.013 cents in fees. And it was done in 2 seconds, wallet to wallet, without anyone kind of along the way in the middle. So that is the potency of what we can do with the Wyoming stable token. I will need to make sure I could send, Madam Chairman, more than 10,000 of them in the future. But that is kind of the very standard flow of going from one wallet to another with a stable coin and a Wyoming stable token. Are there any questions on that? Happy to answer. Commissioner.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you. Yeah, I'm just curious on the gas fees or the fees, are those always going to be the same, or can those, can they be variable based on network and all that sort of thing? And do we have any control over that?
So through the chair, excellent question. The answer is yes, it is variable, right? If there's a lot of network congestion, there's a lot of more transactions happening at a given time, yes, transactions may be more expensive. There's also which chain you're on and how much computational power that's going into it. So on the Ethereum blockchain, that transaction might be something like 18 cents or maybe even $1, right? So it's going to depend on which chain you're on. And there's different trade-offs between security, scalability, speed, and fees are kind of part of that whole mixture. Now, us as the stable token issuer, we don't necessarily have a ton of control over a network. One of the things that I've played around with the stable coin, which doesn't work so great on the test nets, is if you did want to send your Wyoming stable tokens, again, to, let's say it's the same address we just did, one of the little modules you can click as you continue is when you see speed, you can edit this and you can pay more to make your transaction go through faster. Again, with such little fees on this particular network, it doesn't really matter. And again, sometimes test nets are a little less accommodating to these features rather than the main net. But that's the longer answer to your short question. We don't have control over the fees necessarily, but they are variable and they will be different as a baseline across the different networks we're on.
I don't know whether we can do this now, but I'm assuming we probably could, is that we've got, several blockchains we can go over. Can we put a filter in there that says take the least expensive route? So you're not, I guess, held hostage to the random draw?
Great question, through the chair, Commissioner Meyer. So I don't know if we would be able to automate something like that ourselves without a bit of a build, but what I want to do next is demonstrate the bridging capabilities.
The what?
Bridging capabilities, so
Bridging,
going from one chain with the Wyoming stable token to another. And one of the things I can show you when I click around is, again, where those fees may be higher or lower based on how that network looks at that point in time.
Yeah, and I think that we're not doing that, but we could say like, have a charge for our blockchain use of like 1/100th of a cent or something that would be added on to the transactional cost if we so chose to in the future, I suppose.
Sure, there's nothing precluding us from putting fees in place. Again, I think that generally speaking, the goal here has been to get this thing as scalable as possible, and the more fees you put in place are going to be to that detriment. But at the same time, if we think we are scaling appropriately and people have, decent sized balances of Wyoming stable tokens, and, we're doing a large amount of transaction volume, putting like a cent on it, we'll have to do the math on how much that would kind of bring into the coffers versus disincentivize people who go somewhere else that doesn't have a fee, perhaps.
You have to get at least as much to pay for the programming and then just do a cost benefit relationship and move from there.
Right.
Okay.
Any other questions on the wallet to wallet transfers?
Director, and this is probably a little off topic, but the transfer made me think of this. When it sounds like we're waiting on rules for the $10,000 transaction limit to ultimately apply to cryptocurrency, but it sounds like the intent is that ultimately it would. Who would be responsible for that? Or we don't know and we're waiting for further guidance?
Madam Chairman, are we talking about the IRS guidance?
Yes.
So I may phone a friend here and Commissioner Pope, but what I will say is when we had the interim meeting of the Select Committee in May, Mr. Chris Land spoke, who's the General Counsel for Senator Lummis, also the Staff Director of the Senate Banking Subcommittee on Digital Assets. That question was asked, I believe, by Commissioner Pope about some of the tax rules, and his position was, at that point in time, Congress was relying on the IRS for updated rulemaking around stablecoins because they believed they had the rulemaking authority and candidly should be doing it. Again, there may be a little bit of a delta, but I don't think the IRS took the ball and ran with it. I am aware that Senator Lummis had a provision, or had sponsored a provision in the most recent budget bill that had, provisions around taxes and crypto and stablecoins. That, I believe, was stripped out into its own separate bill, and this is where I will transition the conversation, perhaps through the chair, to Commissioner Pope.
Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Director Apollo. Okay, so on Director Apollo's first comment about the IRS not taking the ball and running with it, when you have a rule change within the IRS, it is usually a multi-year process. So it'll be at least 12 months, if not 24 to 36 months before that rule change happens, where they would essentially reclassify stable tokens to be treated as cash because of the lack of gain or loss in a statutorily backed stable token system. So one that is required to have one-to-one backing all the time. There are questions amongst some of my contacts within the IRS as to whether or not they actually have that rulemaking authority because of some of the various provisions within the code that define cash. So that's the kind of the first comment. The second is that there are de minimis provisions within some of the current legislation that allow, I believe it's a $600 de minimis amount for transactions, which in the case of things like international transfers and all of that, it's wholly insignificant and unhelpful. So that's the only real input I have on it. I would love for the commission here and the select committee to accept letters that I've written and send those letters to the IRS by the end of the year, which is when Chris Land requested, in order to have the IRS consider this. The issue is right now that there are questions about who the leadership at the IRS actually is and things like that. Those should be resolved by the end of the year.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you for taking that one on, Commissioner Pope. So going back to the shared screen here, what I'd like to demonstrate is one of our cross-chain transfers using a front end and a platform called Stargate. This has been built by Layer 0. It's now spun out. It's its own thing, but everything happening in the back end is with our partnership with Layer 0. If you were to get onto this platform, you would connect your wallet. So this is the FDCBA wallet I was just using. You can see that I've got all my balances here. So I have some of these native tokens like Ethereum, like AVAX, which is the Avalanche token. And then you see that I've got Wyoming stable tokens across a number of these chains. So there's also a simple interface here. We can just plug in, I want to go from one chain to another. How much? Great. I'll go to advanced settings so you can see a little bit more detail, advanced transfer, so you can see a bit more detail. Again, you could see the assets I have in my wallet. Well, I'm not sure if you can see from there because again, it is a little small, but let's boost this up. So what I'd like to do is transfer some funds from the Arbitrum blockchain, for example, where I've got $9,610 worth of Wyoming stable tokens, and send it over to the base blockchain where I've got $20,777 worth of Wyoming stable tokens. One thing I will quickly mention, and this, Mr. Treasurer, goes back to your question, is around some of the fees that we may see. So if I just smash a couple of buttons here and say that I'm going to not send any gas over to the other side of things, when gas, again, powers these transactions, you can see that this transaction between Arbitrum to base is projected to cost about 3 cents, and then it would take about a minute to do. But if I was trying to bridge from the Ethereum blockchain to, Ethereum blockchain where I have Wyoming stable tokens, to, let's say, Optimism, that would again be, 3 cents. I've seen this as a more expensive type of case. This one from Ethereum to Avalanche would be 22 cents, for example. And again, that's just based on how much computational power is required on one chain or how much transfer activity or transaction activity there is on one chain. So there will be some deltas there, but you can get these estimates ahead of time before you do the transaction.
Avalanche is a little faster, isn't it?
Well, we will have a demo of the Hashfire platform on Avalanche momentarily. I will note that the transfers I've done on Avalanche are going from wallet to wallet. It's like 9 zeros before you hit, a 1. So we're talking about 100,000ths of a fraction of a penny in fee.
Yeah, okay.
So we'll try to run this again, going from Arbitrum.
Madam Chair. My apologies, Director Apollo. Just a quick question. How much transparency is there on these fees, and can they be projected ahead of time by someone like, let's say, General Motors that is transferring 1 million tokens for, to a plant in Taiwan that manufactures one of its components? How would they be able to know ahead of time and project those fees?
Through the chair, Commissioner Pope, generally speaking, yes. I mean, that's what we're looking at right now. I know it's probably a little hard to see, but again, you do get your estimates here on the front end. When I go to actually do this transfer, we will get the MetaMask widget to pop up and then ask me for my password, which is a little less helpful in my response here. But again, I will quickly just show you. Let's be able to log in. There we go. This is super zoomed in, but so you see we have this request. You are, let me make sure I'm on the right network, first and foremost. Fail, that's good, we want to see that. Yep, there we go, now we're on Arbitrum. So we'll go to transfer. Again, this will spin up the transaction for us. We'll get a transaction request. Now we're on the right network. And you could see that the network fee here is 0.9 cents worth of ETH. I'm going to try to confirm this. I'm not missing anything by being so zoomed in here. But this will then start the transaction up. And this is where we will start bridging from the Arbitrum to Base. We'll click View on Block Explorer. This will take a moment to load. But this is, again, giving you all the transaction details in real time as you are essentially sending a message on the Arbitrum chain to burn the tokens there and then mint them on the chain, the destination chain. So essentially there's really kind of two transactions in here. And again, this is a little bit more computationally heavy than the wallet-to-wallet transfer we just saw. So we expect the fees to be a little higher, again, depending on destination chain or where you're launching the transaction from. There, again, these will all be kind of variable, but we'll keep an eye on the balances we have here and this transaction, again, going through in functioning real time. So we're seeing that as these transactions are being processed, we're getting those updates in real time. So for example, we see that the DVN here has been successful. The DVN is a distributed verifier node. That's the layer 0 structure where you can get messages across chain and instructions on chain to actually start moving the tokens around. And now we see that the transaction is already completed. So I think that probably took a little bit less than 90 seconds. Okay, it took 47 seconds to get this transaction through. And then when we look for the amount of fees that took, we can look on, I'm not entirely sure we get that visibility here. In part, I'm kind of jumping around a bit. But we can also just go back to my wallet on Stargate, check out this transaction. That cost about 3 cents to do, as was expected. So again, that preview said it was 3 cents, and we're seeing 3 cents here. Right, so again, we have some visibility. Now, if you really want to get down to the weeds in the tech stack, there's something called the MEV that essentially allows you to monitor the transaction pool on Ethereum virtual machine networks. This gets very technical very quickly. You're talking about multiple transactions in and out of the same block. But that's really if you want to front run transactions where you're expecting a lot of volatility. So if you're in like a meme token or something like that, where you know, the seconds will make a difference of whatever valuation you're going to get, that's when that all comes into play. For stable coins, it's less relevant, right? Because we're always looking to be pegged to $1 here. So that would be, again, a longer answer to perhaps a shorter question. But that's what I wanted to share. Again, we've moved now 7,676 WIST from Arbitrum to Base. Took about 45 seconds, it cost about 3 cents. And so this is something that users will be able to do when they have Wyoming stable tokens on one network. They'll be able to use a front end like this to go to whatever chain they want to transact on. Perhaps that's because there's some program, platform, game that they want to use on one network and they've got their tokens on another. They could use a structure like this to go back and forth. Or perhaps, to the Commissioner Meyer's point, they simply want to just find where fees are the cheapest and do the majority of their transactions there. So there's a lot of variability and a lot of work went into getting this done. So I want to thank the Layer 0 and Fireblocks teams as well. And I'm happy to answer any questions on this.
Any further questions?
One question
Go ahead.
kind of comes to mind is that, say you take something that takes 47 seconds to do, and you're using Ethereum or any other, actively traded coin. And there's a change in the value of that coin between that 47 seconds. Do you always come up and have the exact $17,000 exchanged? And how does that work? Does the value of the underlying coin, is it set at the first second and remains that until the transaction is done? Or is there any float during that time period?
That is a very astute question through the chair, Commissioner Meyer. What you're talking about is the concept of slippage. So essentially, slippage is a tolerance that you as the user can set based on that delta, exactly what you're talking about, right? So again, less relevant for stable tokens, but for the native tokens that are powering the transaction as gas, if you were to set your slippage tolerance, like I have here at 0.5%, and your underlying token moves more than that within the time you're trying to get that transaction appended into a block, it will cancel the transaction for you. Now, if I really want this to go through come hell or high water, and I don't care how much I'm paying, I could put the slippage tolerance at 5%. It'll warn me that you may pay high fees, but that's exactly the concept you're talking about. So the user has control over that at the transactional level.
The sender or the receiver?
The sender. So if I'm sending you Wyoming stable tokens and I'm paying for that, the gas for that transaction in ETH on the Ethereum blockchain, that's something that I would set. You would be completely, you're not paying any fees as a
So
receiver.
essentially, the receiver would still get the $17,000, but the sender, that slippage would be added to the fee.
The slippage is essentially, that is one way to think about it, yeah. We can get kind of pedantic about the wording, but yes.
So the person that's expecting the 17,000, they always get it.
Yes.
But if there's a big change or something like that in that time period, then, so really, if you're going to send a lot of money, you want to make sure that everybody is on the same network, so it just goes right and using the same coin, so it goes real fast.
Yeah, more or less.
Yeah, okay, all right, thanks.
Any other questions on the wallet transfers or cross-chain transfers? Hearing none, I am more than happy to go to our first demonstration of the Wyoming stable token. So as a reminder, we have been working on a pilot program where we've reached out to Wyoming domiciled companies with existing blockchain-enabled platforms who may or may not be using stable coins already and would perhaps want to use a Wyoming stable token for whatever reason. They just want a stable coin to use, or they have a use case that is particularly benefits from having a sovereign issued stable coin. One that we won't have today, but I certainly want to give acknowledgement to, is the team over at Cattleproof, Rob Jennings, Mark Tague, and their team. It is a USDA verified platform that puts data about steer on chain using a platform called IPFS, the Interplanetary File System, for whatever that's worth. They have demonstrated that if you're able to move that data about feedlots, vaccination schedules, et cetera, with the steer, you could sell that steer or an end beef product for significantly more because you have that provenance. But what they're not able to do currently, or they could do with a different stable coin that's not Wyoming based, is move value with that data. And they're interested in doing so with the Wyoming stable token. We're working with them on that. I'm hoping that for either our next regular meeting, they'll join us for that, or we might have them just kind of give us a demo along the way and share that with the commission and push that public. So I wanted to give them a shout out because they are looking to build that on the Solana blockchain. But I do want to go over to John Belitsky, the founder and CEO of Hashfire, which is a programmable agreements platform incorporated in Wyoming. With over 20 years of experience spanning real estate, finance, and blockchain innovation, John has dedicated the past year to working closely with Wyoming's leaders to advance digital asset adoption and sovereign-backed blockchain infrastructure. John has participated in multiple legislative sessions in Wyoming, provided in-person testimony to the Select Committee on Blockchain, and collaborating with policymakers to shape practical, forward-thinking blockchain legislation. He has also participated as a subject matter advisor to the Commission, providing technical and financial insights on the Operations Subcommittee. Hashfire is backed by Avalanche's Blizzard Fund and recognized as a first-place winner in the recent Codebase Incubator Program, and is helping shape the future of payments and enterprise finance. Take it away.
Thank you, Executive Director Apollo. And thank you to the commissioners. It's always a pleasure to present to Wyoming. I hold the state in the highest regard. It's a real honor to be here today. In my view, Wyoming stable token is really the oil in programmable engines that are smart contracts. The highest and best use of a programmable stable token is to allow these contracts to execute with authenticated, validated, auditable data that supports them. This is the critical piece that's been missing in the automation of contracts, which for a long time has been described Ricardian contracts. This has been sort of a promise of technology that we're seeing come to life today with tools like the Wyoming stable token. These contracts unlock a completely new category of trust and automation, which accelerates business in ways that are difficult to even comprehend today. They reliably execute based on predefined terms with no human error, no delays, and no intermediaries. This means faster payments, fewer mistakes, significantly lower transaction costs. Executive Director Apollo showed you some of the transaction fees on some of these networks. Those fees are trending towards zero, as are transaction fees writ large as a result of this technology. Those fees are effectively a tax on your citizens, on normal everyday people trying to do business, make payments, send money back home, and they're going away. And with the inclusion of things like Hashfire that build programmable engines to govern the direction of those tokens, we're now getting to a place where this logic can execute reliably with no intermediaries at all. In the state, that means pristine audit trails and operational efficiencies. For vendors, it's instant payments that are verified. For citizens, it's better services at lower costs. And what I'm about to show you today is Hashfire's view of how we can use the Wyoming stable token to power these programmable agreement engines that we've created. This is an incredibly practical demonstration of how the Wyoming stable token really is a game changer. And I'll be around to answer some questions after a short video that I've created for you guys. This video has audio. Are we able to put the audio on the video?
We've got you loud and clear, John, on the audio. We're just trying to get this thing to be full screen here. John, is the audio coming through on your side? Because we could hear it in the room.
It's not, but if you can hear it, then I'm happy.
Okay. Works for me. Through the chair, John, thank you and the team for presenting all of that. I've had the benefit of seeing it live, but one of the things I wanted to just mention, and I'm certainly happy to give you the ball back in the conversation, is I think there's a pretty obvious delta from what we just saw in the presentation that I did, right? Where there's windows popping up everywhere, there's different wallets, you're logging in, things are popping up, closing down. It's a little, there's some UI and UX hurdles there. With platforms that can use the Wyoming stable token, Hashfire being one of them, there's an opportunity for users of WIST to kind of abstract away a lot of that if they're not necessarily just sending funds directly. We're not building a front end. We don't have the team nor the budget to accommodate that. We're creating the product here, but this is an example of teams that are interested in already in taking what we are looking to launch in the very near future, and then integrating it into existing platforms to move it forward. So John, I will throw it back to you through the chair for any kind of final comments to wrap up, and then I'll turn it over to the commissioners for any questions.
Thank you. The sort of affect that you just described is often described as abstraction, which is an objective inside of blockchain development to try to make it much more simple and feel much more like a Web 2 application. And so what you just saw is exactly that. The user never interacts with the blockchain directly unless they want to go and actually audit the underlying data that's powering those transactions. They don't need to go fetch tokens for gas, which is what you saw Executive Director Apollo sort of working with earlier for his bridging exercise. These things just sort of happen. And so we've reached a point with this technology where it really is ready for prime time. It's ready for enterprise, institutions, and states to use it to power self-executing agreements and transactions that are programmable and auditable.
Madam Chairman,
Go ahead.
I guess if this is going to be used in a governmental fashion or in any other way, everybody's got a different checklist, and I'm assuming it's programmable, but what's the ease of programming your different checklists or your boxes that you have to go through? So is there a template and you add those to that, and then is there any interaction between your program and any other data set that would indicate whether or not that has been met, or does that have to be uploaded, or is that a separate program that the agency runs? Just kind of trying to understand the interaction in this whole process and the ease of getting it to its automatic.
That's a wonderful question. So the program is drag and drop. You effectively set your compliance sequence, or what we call your compliance chain, at the onset of any process flow. And that compliance chain, regardless of your checklist, is almost always incredibly similar. And it becomes a question of who is going to review this data and approve it and apply their public key, their wallet address, their name, their title to the approval of a given event. And it follows this sequence. And so what our program does is it allows anyone to create any sequence they like and then codify that in a smart contract that asserts that this exact sequence was executed precisely as the architect designed it. So whomever that is, whether that's an executive assistant or the governor himself, you simply drag and drop the sequence of events that you'd like to see happen. And there's only one way for a transaction to occur, and that is if all of those conditions are met on chain.
Okay, so the underlying, I guess, programming language, is it Python? Is it something else, or combination of different languages?
The smart contracts are written in Solidity. We are on the Avalanche blockchain for all of our financial transactions, and our own blockchain on the Ava Cloud Network, which is the cloud computing arm of Avalanche. And so they use the EVM, the Ethereum virtual machine, and that compels us, most people generally, to use Solidity for those smart contracts. It's the most popular language for them.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Belitsky? And I believe he will be available afterwards if anyone has additional questions. Okay, thank you so much. That was interesting.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And John, thank you again for your time. Now I would like to bring up our second and final demo of the morning, which is Marco Rubel from Fundora. Marco Rubel is a fifth-generation Wyoming native, entrepreneur, and community builder. He founded What Fest, Wyoming's premier independent music and arts festival, and hosts the Beyond the Range podcast with Wyoming Public Media. Marco is co-founder of Bend Rubel Sound, YourGuides.io, and CEO of Fundora, a platform on the Ethereum blockchain, bringing blockchain-based capital tools to Main Street businesses and small and medium-sized enterprises. He's an alum of the University of Wyoming, Silicon Couillard, and G Beta Wyoming, where we had a chance to meet, and lives in Cody with his wife, Lindsay, and their 2 children. So Marco's joining me up on the dais. Push the button to talk. Apparently, I was told this morning I got to talk a little louder, get a little closer to it, so he might be in the same boat. And then Marco has sent a demo over, which again we'll play for the Zoom. We're going to try to play, I'll let you say a few words, then we'll try to play it on my side, see if we get audio both in the room and online. And if we can't do that, then Steph will play it at loud volumes in here and we'll go from there. You really got to jam it.
Can you hear me? Okay. Madam Chair, Commission, my name is Marco. I am a lifelong resident of Wyoming. And really, I'm here because I feel that economic diversification is like a critical issue of our time. And I think that the Wyoming stable token represents a vector that we can sort of address economic diversification. So in my travels and adventures around Wyoming, I have talked to a lot of small business owners, nonprofits that have kind of faced an access to capital problem. And so I've created Fundora, which is a peer-to-peer lending tool for small businesses and nonprofits, both in Wyoming and elsewhere. Fundora is very early stage. We're in the pilot program with the Wyoming Stable Token Commission. And really we're trying to generate use cases and figure out a way to tell the story of the Wyoming Stable Token through, the people in Wyoming. Because I feel very strongly that if the Wyoming Stable Token is to succeed, it's going to start at home. And the people who are using it in Wyoming are going to have to see themselves in this. So we thought, what better way to do that than like Main Street, Wyoming, nonprofits, that sort of thing. So as I mentioned, we're very early stage. And right now we run off of a thing called Bulla Network. And the demo that I'll show will show sort of the plumbing, the behind the scenes of how Fundora works. Sitting on top of Bulla, which Bulla is an on-chain credit protocol and app that businesses and individuals can use to make payments, create invoices, manage accounts, and finance working capital. Bulla is currently financing and settling invoices for the trucking industry, where liquidity is an ongoing challenge. Since August of 2024, Bulla has settled more than a lot in trucking invoices on chain, saving truckers up to 90% on time and fees. These invoices are financed by Bulla's stablecoin-backed liquidity pools. These pools earn up to 10.5% APR on 30 to 40-day commercial papers. So from here, I would say let's roll that beautiful blockchain footage, if you don't mind. Somebody?
Steph, I'll do it from my side. Or do you want to flip a few buttons on your end and give it a shot? The old college try.
Yeah. And if all else fails, maybe I'll act this out or something.
Interpretive dance.
Interpretive dance, yes.
question?
Go ahead, Treasurer Matt.
Yeah, just wondering, can this set up like an auto pay so you don't have to go back through the whole transaction things and automatically gets deducted from your blockchain account into the other account?
Yeah, kind of like, it's going to require confirmation, by the debtor and whatnot, both on the receiving end, but then also paying back end. Right now, because these are really small transactions, just
Yeah.
like peer-to-peer, we're just paying out on one payment within the lending term limit. So,
Right. Yeah, and that all works fine. It's just looking at it, if it was a business, say a payday loan company wanted to do this, and, and they're having thousands of transactions a month, rather than having to hire people to actually go in there and click and drag and drop and do all of that. That's where I see, maybe a type of business plan that might like to do this, because it's maybe quicker and in different ways like that, or even the banking industry for certain extent that might be easier for them to operate these small type of mini loans, or or even, I guess there are some economic development situations where you have micro loans or something to small businesses or different things, that try to get it more automated. So, we love hiring people, but we don't want to hire people if we don't have to. Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Okay.
Madam Chair.
Thanks for being here. That was interesting, and I think has our wheels turning for sure. Any other questions?
Madam Chair?
Go ahead.
And for me, it's not so much a question, but a comment on all of this. In 2007, Apple released the iPhone, and what turned out to be the best thing about the iPhone wasn't that it was another phone. What it became was a platform for all of the apps and all of the ingenuity of the marketplace to figure out use cases for essentially a computer that was a phone. And it became wildly successful, mainly because of the apps and its ability to do more than just be a phone. What I see is us releasing the stable token, as Mr. Lawhorn usually says, into the wild. And once it goes into the wild, the ingenuity of the marketplace is immense, and it will create use cases that we don't even know what they are right now. So I think, thank you to everyone out there that is creating a new use case for WIST and stable tokens, because there is no limit to what it will accomplish. Thank you. A little bit of grandstanding there, but.
Agree, and these are just two of the endless possibilities. Right. Okay, thank you so much
If
for
I
being
may,
here.
just quickly, Madam Chairman?
Yep, go ahead.
Again, on the back of Commissioner Pope's comment, I want to kind of just double down on that, right? This is just what's, two of the teams that are available in our own backyard, right? This has some pretty immense possibilities. And I know I don't want to speak for you, but nor for Mr. Belitsky, but I do know that these platforms are live, being utilized, right? And we can't necessarily, we have to keep things arm's length, right? Everyone has a code of conduct. We can't support, things just because they're willing to use Wyoming stable tokens. But, I think we've had discussions along the way. I'll put it this way. We've had a number of discussions along the way about how some of the more traditional financial systems can get involved, the efficiencies of blockchain. And I think what we're seeing today is really demonstrable of that. This is efficiencies of things like loans that could be, that maybe could benefit from a traditional finance wrapper around it. And that would be maybe a question or a toss up to you, just in terms of your perspective, what you're seeing in terms of adoption or interest on your side from the traditional sector to use something like what you presented with Fundora
Yeah, so I had a meeting last Friday with the community bank in Wyoming. And, you know, the sort of takeaway with all of this, like, we're with the meeting, but then with Fundora and the stable token was, and this was one of the commercial lenders, we're very curious. We have more clarity from a regulatory standpoint. We don't know where to go. We don't know who to talk to. We barely know anything about stable token, but from, you know, what we hear casually or whatnot. However, our clients, our depositors increasingly are involved in crypto, whatever that means, right? You know, whether it's native tokens, whether it's stable tokens, whatever. And we need answers, which to me suggests like, okay, like they have a job to do. They are beginning to get more and more interest in this space, and they want solutions, and they want sound solutions and transparent solutions. So, you know, from my perspective, from Fundora, like, yeah, we're expanding Main Street to the Wyoming, or in Wyoming to the world. We're doing all this stuff, but really, like, we're just augmenting a system that's already there and doing it in a way with a rail that's much more efficient and transparent. So I hope that answers, or, you know, kind of goes in line with Anthony's question, but yeah.
I like the utility that you have on this, and I actually think that the banks could actually do things that they aren't doing now, where they might have to, if they're making a lot of small loans or something like that, that it doesn't necessarily equate to hire another loan officer or two or three to do these small things. But if you can have an automated platform that can actually facilitate that and really, you know, drive up, you know, their revenue at the same time as doing those type of things cheaper, you know, it makes sense that could be a use case for other financial institutions, I guess. And to the back, I'll say including credit unions, who knows, you know, so, but yeah, it seems like, you know, that type of a technology, and to Commissioner Pope's thing is that, yeah, there's a lot of things that you use on your iPhone that essentially you used to write out a check to somebody, and now you just hit Apple Pay, you know, especially when you're doing online transactions and stuff. And I think at some point in time, there'll be an app, you know, more or less like you guys are using, but, you know, with all of the bells and whistles that would need to be put in place. And so I think it just is another payment rail that's more efficient. And I think it could actually drive a lot more business in different directions that they don't have now, because it's just too costly to do it today. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Marco.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Madam Chair, Commission, thank you very much.
And I imagine you'll be around if commissioners have questions afterwards, or?
Yes, I will be here the whole period.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for making the drive as well.
My pleasure, all 6.5 hours.
It's not short or direct.
Madam Chairman, the next item on our list is the blockchain selection exercise, followed by a rulemaking memo and then the policy docs. We are at about the 90-minute mark, just checking in as we go from one kind of segment here to another. Anyone need a breather? I know we don't typically offer those during these, and we just keep powering
Would
through.
anybody like a brief break or power through? I'm okay either way.
And I think as we go along, there are areas where we need to stand up, take a break, whatever. I'm not.
Okay, great. I'd say let's power through.
Unless Director Paul.
Through the chair, as we talked about yesterday, we'll keep on rocking in the free world here.
Okay.
And go from there. All right, well, the next item on our docket is the blockchain selection exercise. This one should be relatively quick. Again, you have the memo in front of you. From the perspective of the background, we've kept all of this context in here. So the first page and a half is pretty much what we always say. We, went through the blockchain selection process for the first time in Q4 of 2024. We obviously got a lot of interest. We have continued on a good faith basis, continued our recurring assessment of different chains and networks as part of what we expect to become our, which is now, as I will talk about in a few minutes, part of our formal procurement process We do on a quarterly basis now have rules that say we will be doing this exercise, so we're kind of in a transitionary period, but we go through the exercise regardless. It is a quarterly process. In month one, we update any criteria as the commission sees fit. For last month's exercise, that was quite quick. What we did was update the binary criteria for vendor support. So again, one of the criteria you have to pass in order to get scored as a network, to say that the blockchain is supported, and this is the addition, or will be supported within the next 2 quarters by vendors engaged for the purposes of token development, blockchain infrastructure, and financial audit and attestation. A point here being that we are a small team, small budget. We can't keep tacking on parts to accommodate every blockchain ever, but we do not want to be exclusionary either. So if there are chains that are on the roadmaps of our partners and we validate that with them, we could start bringing in other networks to candidacy. So that was last month's change. Then in month 2, we do a preliminary assessment. Sorry, Commissioner Meyer, do you have a question?
Just, I guess, kind of the original recommendation was 5 layer 1 and 4 layer 2. I guess I would, view that as kind of a beginning policy, and not to really hold yourself to whether they're layer 1 or layer 2, that basically you look at it from the standpoint, are they a good blockchain to move forward on?
Through the chair, Commissioner Meyer, that's exactly how we're moving forward.
Yeah.
Right, so that may have been the initial assessment, but since then, I'm talking about last month, but if you go back 2 months to the Q3 exercise, we did add 2 different networks to the candidacy. Those are Aptos and SEI, SEI. So those are now in the roster as well. And again, they'll be considered just as everything else is being considered. Candidly, we do have a mandate or encouragement from the select committee to be multi-chain and tech agnostic. So the more we could bring on, provided there's sufficient interest and liquidity, security, and other thresholds are met, we're open for business. So just in terms of this month, this is the preliminary assessment. So this, in month 2, there's not much to talk about, because that exercise is essentially, we spent the last month collecting data, first-party data from chains that may be interested in being assessed going forward. We did send out evaluation forms to 55 individuals across 21 different blockchain networks who are not currently candidates to collect that. This time around, we got 4 new networks that submitted a request for information consideration. That being said, only 2 formal submissions were received. So what we do now, typically, and we disclose everything kind of after we do the final assessment, because what we do now is we go back and forth with the different teams, assess the information, look at what they've given us, we validate it independently. We have an open dialogue with these teams and then figure out if they have, if they've passed through our binaries, hit our marks. This time around, I think only 1 network passed the binary criteria inclusive of vendor support. We'll just go back and forth, make sure we've got all our information correct. And then at the end of next month, we will go ahead and present all the scoring across all the different 25 plus metrics we have at this point. So this is more of an FYI, no recommendation, no action required. Just wanted to let the commission know that we will begin, again, that reach out process to the networks that did submit for this go around, and then the majority of which submitted in prior rounds, just to make sure that our scoring is all still appropriate. And if they want to correct the record, they have an opportunity to do so. Any questions on that? Hearing none, Madam Chairman, I'm happy to proceed. We will go on next to the July 2025 rulemaking update memo. We'll have 3 quick updates on this, and then we will get into the token management rules, as well as then we'll segue into more of the policy focus and see how far along we get on that. So in your rulemaking update memo, we'll start off with the rule set for procurement. Again, all of the preamble and background has not been changed, nor has the results or submission sections for this. I just want everyone to have all the context in one place. So for procurement, we've went through the process of drafting all the rules, having our public notice and comment period. For procurement, we received no comments, so there was nothing to do there. We submitted those final rule package that was approved by the commission in early June. on May 30th. We submitted that to the Secretary of State's office on June 3rd. That kicks off a process in which the rules are reviewed by the Legislative Services Office. They did not have any material findings. We were in the scope of statutory authority and legislative intent. And then they kick it off to the Management Council. Management Council then has its own review process and creates its own feedback, which I don't believe the agency is privy to. But both LSO's feedback and Management Council's feedback are provided to the governor. The governor can then make the ultimate determination, regardless of what the feedback says, as to whether he will approve or deny the rulemaking. So I'm happy to report that for our procurement rules, these were signed and went into force kind of perpetually on July 10th. Those are on the Secretary of State's website on the Administrative Rules section. Those are on our website, and they are there to stay. Any questions on procurement?
It's been a while since I've looked at those. I wanted to talk about that, I guess the concept of when things are private and when they're public. And I think we had to go through a judicial review. I wanted to make sure that it was at least a chancery court or a district court, so we don't have a municipal court saying that it's got to be public knowledge or whatever. I didn't know what that threshold or where that bar was set.
So through the chair, Commissioner Meyer, I'm not sure our procurement rules would cover that because that's more about the Wyoming Public Records Act, which is a separate segment of statute in Title 16, rather than rules. That
Well,
being
let's
said,
do a little analysis to make sure that as we go forward that, that county commissioners can't do it or a city council can't do it or municipal court. Let's try to get it to the chancery or the district court or federal court. So, the competent jurisdiction, I don't know whether there's a definition on that, but just, just to make sure that as we go forward, before we get too far down the road, that we make sure that, we can use it as the legislature, and I think we all agree, as anything that's not prohibited by state or federal statute.
to the chair, Commissioner Meyer, can do. We could follow up on that.
Thanks. Yeah.
And we'll make sure we couch that from the procurement perspective in both the confidentiality of submissions for different bids, and because that is to a certain extent protected under commercial confidential information. And then, yeah, we'll leave it there for now, but happy to take that with you. Any other questions? Okay. Quickly moving on to the rules around public records, has kind of the same backstory as the procurement piece. This is again fees assessed with Wyoming Public Records Act's submissions to us. This is something where we simply adopted rules that were put forth by the Department of Administration Information. Other agencies like the Attorney General's office have adopted them as well. Follows the same path and cadence as the procurement rules. We did receive one public comment on this. We addressed it directly. That was all, again, happening in early June. Kicked this off the Secretary of State's office, onto the Legislative Services Office. No material findings. Staff recommendation that the rules be placed on the consent list for the Management Council. Went off to Management Council in mid-June, and as of July 10th, again, came back approved from the governor. So should we receive Wyoming Public Records requests in the future, we will be able to assess fees for the time spent and the materials thereon. We try to, provide as much as possible on our public website in terms of documentation that is put forth in front of the commission. That's different than things like emails or other kind of communications docs, but that is how that will all work going forward. Any questions on that? Hearing none, we'll keep going. So this one's a bit of we went through this last time, I guess, so not much to say on this, but for reserves management, during our special meeting we had just about 2 weeks ago, we went through the comments that we received, our public notice and comment period for reserves management rules concluded on June 30th. We received 3 comments from one individual through our online portal, as well as a letter from the Wyoming Bankers Association that came in through physical mail. We did respond to both of those. We did make, I think, 4 changes to the rules, which I have not represented here verbatim because we just went through it. But in short, there were 2 additions to clauses pertaining to the delegated authority to the director and the commission staff. So when it comes to, for our reserves management rules, doing things like opening accounts or moving money around, there was just a kind of a parenthetical added to ensure that any of the actions taken were consistent with policies put in place and approved by the commission. And we also added one kind of new clause. If you recall, there was like a redundant clause. We just added one in that slot to say any actions taken under those delegated authorities would be presented by the director to the commission in regular meetings, much like this. There was also one instance of the word "or" being repeated in Chapter 3 of those rules. That was zapped. And then we sent those on to the Secretary of State's office. Those were approved there. Already went to the Legislative Services Office, came back with a clean bill of health already. Again, findings are that the rules appear to be within the scope of statutory authority and legislative intent. And the recommendation from LSO is to be added to the consent list for the Management Council, where it now resides. I will make one last note on this, which is if we are following the same cadence that we did with the procurement and the WPRA rules, and we get positive direction from Management Council and it goes to the governor, he signs off, I do not expect that we will, I would expect this to be completed ahead of our anticipated August 20th launch date of the Wyoming stable token in its fully reserved capacity. I don't think we'll need emergency rules for this. So that's where reserves management now resides. Any questions on that? Hearing none, we will continue on to token management, and this is where we'll get back into the formal set of rules. But I think last time around at our last regular meeting, we did kind of a super high level version of this and just kind of giving an overview of what the chapters contain. What I'd like to do is kind of just review that quickly and then go into some more detail of these chapters. Again, the goal is not for us to approve this today. The goal would be to get the thumbs up on this at our meeting on August 4th. Again, I do believe these are in good shape. They've gone through review internally with the AG's office, with Paul Hastings, and also with several subject matter advisors who have tagged in. But I do want to make sure that this is part of what we're calling this hybridization pass, where something we put into rules is not inadvertently contravening page 32 of our privacy policy or something like that. So to give you an idea of what is in these rules, there's 6 chapters. General provisions is pretty straightforward. These are the definitions. This is, again, more focused on the technical aspect rather than the financial aspect. So while you'll see a couple things in here like permitted investments or licensed service provider, which were in the reserves management rules before, they are repeated here in certain instances where we're using defined terms like issued or redeemed along those lines. But in addition, now we're talking about terms like minting, where we actually create the token on a blockchain, or burning, where we destroy that token on a blockchain. We've also added definitions to token holders, multi-signature or multi-signature wallets, multi-party computation, essentially as ways we can define how the agency and beyond, maybe other apparatus within the state, will help with the key management and rotation that governs the issuance and redemption of Wyoming stable tokens. Also in Chapter 1 is the limited delegation of technical authority. Again, this is meant to parallel the limited delegation of fiscal authority we had in the reserves management rules. So one of the changes I've made, or the team has made, since the last time we presented this, was taking the wording that was added during the last meeting as that non-substantive feedback, and we've put that into as a kind of a top-level item on the delegation of technical authorities. Now this says the commission delegates to the director limited authority to, and here's the add, in accordance with control procedures established by the commission. And then we have the same roster of features, which is manage the supply and transfer of Wyoming stable tokens, onboard licensed service providers, token holders, or other authenticated partners, offer a gas fee subsidies to make sure people can move tokens around, and then purchase and manage digital assets so we ourselves can pay for gas to actually power the transactions that will issue or burn the tokens. We have the same kind of pieces at the bottom. The director may delegate responsibilities to the commission staff. So again, our C-suite. Any authority granted in this section may be limited by the commission. And then any actions taken under the delegated authority within this section shall be reported to the commission at its next regular meeting. So we've added that wording in from our commentary, but a few weeks ago. Any questions on chapter 1? Excellent. And I would invite, to the extent that my team has any feedback, if I'm glossing over things or missing anything, please do just raise a hand. I will get my head on a swivel here and keep looking at the screen to see if anyone's got a hand up to add anything I may miss along the way. So chapter 2 is cryptographic asset management. This has more to do with how we are creating, securing, and storing and managing the keys that are responsible, again, for minting Wyoming stable tokens or burning Wyoming stable tokens. You'll see that we've used the terms multi-signature, multi-party computation wallets. These are, again, instances where you can have multiple sets of keys and some amount of signers, let's say 3 out of 5, have to turn their keys to do some kind of transaction or move tokens around. It cannot be unilaterally done by one party. There's redundancies involved, there's maintaining secure facilities, et cetera. As we expand this responsibility beyond the agency, which we would expect to happen in the fairly near term, we would create an internal training program for key holders within the state. We'll need to onboard them, create an agreement for those key holders to make sure that they are operating above board, and then again, procure devices and physical media necessary for storing those keys. Then there is a high-level kind of clause here about incident response. This kind of punts to creating an incident response plan and a disaster recovery plan. We have many of those kind of in our inventory from the vendors that we're engaging that are very much in the same kind of arena that we are. But I will point out this section is a little short, and that is intentional. As a reminder, and based on some of the feedback we got on the reserves management rules that we discussed back on the 2nd, the goal here is not for rules to be incredibly granular and specific. They're meant to be generally applicable. That's the wording in actual statute. So again, this is just making sure that we as a commission that will have some level of authority over how stable tokens are moving around. If anything goes sideways, we've got mechanisms in place to make sure we can lock things down and straighten out any situation that might go in the direction we don't want it to go from a technical perspective. Any questions on chapter 2? Chapter 3, which is token supply management, is very similar to chapter 2. Again, designating key holders not only for managing the system, but actually moving the tokens around. Creating exception policies to minting and burning procedures. We'll talk more about that when we talk about the next chapter. And then this one, again, it compels us to conduct regular security audits, and we'll talk about what that looks like perhaps down the road a little bit once the tech stack comes together. Implementing logging systems and audit trails so that we have a record at any given time of transactions that are happening on chain, but also who's holding the keys at any given time and what actions they're taking. Implementing any kind of emergency procedures to perhaps halt the activity of a smart contract. And issue tokens on any blockchain approved by the commission, again, going back to the whole candidacy question that we talked about a moment ago. So again, brief and meant to be generally applicable rather than specifically applicable. Any questions in chapter 3? Okay. Chapter 4, we'll probably spend a moment more on. And I would invite our Chief Risk and Compliance Officer, Deb, to raise a hand if she wants to add anything. This is where we talk about interdiction of Wyoming stable tokens. So again, the expectation for us as a government agency is that this is going to be a much more strict process than what's available to the private incumbents who issue stablecoins. So one of the things we've done in the definitional section in chapter 1 that is embedded well here is the concept of temporary lawful legal directive and a final lawful legal directive. Summarizing quite a bit here, what this really means is the commission cannot take action over a token holder's Wyoming stable tokens unless there is some kind of court order in place. there's also a couple of ways that we can block things from happening to begin with that pertain specifically, in this case, to the Office of Foreign Asset Control and the SDN list, which is to say that OFAC maintains a list of wallet addresses that are kind of known nefarious actors, and there are controls in place on our side to make sure tokens don't go to them to begin with. But should they get there for whatever reason, or a wallet that holds tokens is designated as such, then we would be authorized to act in that capacity. And again, that's the freezing part is downstream of a temporary lawful legal directive. But if we were going to actually go ahead and seize tokens, this is where that would need to be downstream of a final lawful legal directive. And these are, again, looking at the definitions in Chapter 1. A temporary lawful legal directive would be, temporary restraining orders, preliminary injunctions, cease and desists. A final lawful legal directive, give you an idea of the dichotomy between those. That's a final judgment issued by a judicial, administrative, or regulatory body having jurisdiction over the commission, right? So this is, again, to say we cannot necessarily take action on our own volition. There needs to be an actual court order in place with some kind of determination. And I will go even further to say that in Section 4D, we are able to analyze that relevant information that we are receiving and assess it in relation to any action we would take. So again, Deb, as well as Commissioner Naves, if you wanted to add anything, I know this is kind of a critical section where we look a lot different than the incumbents. Deb, I see you on screen. I will, through the chair, ask to recognize Ms. Brooks. Deb?
Yes, hi. Hello, everyone. I think Director Apollo summed it up nicely. Ultimately, the purpose of this particular chapter is to allow flexibility on preserving the reputation of the token and ensuring that it's not being used for illegal or illicit purposes, non-lawful activity. The freezing is the temporary hold, and the seizing is the permanent retaking. And as such, both primarily, particularly the seizing, requires some form of a judicial action in order for us to commence the permanent removal or destruction of a WIS token. Freezing is more of a temporary hold, if you will, on the token, whether primarily directed by some type of court order that has jurisdiction over the commission. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess, Deborah, what's the definition of a judicial body having jurisdiction over the commission? Just if there's any clarification there. So what is that I'm pretty sure that like a district court or a federal court, if they issued a temporary or a freeze, that would be a judicial body that would have that jurisdiction, but I'm not sure how low it goes.
Well, again, through the chair, thank you for asking that question. With the help of our partners at the Attorney General's office, my understanding, and others can correct me, of course, the federal courts in the state of Wyoming that have jurisdiction over us. There are certain state courts that would have jurisdiction over the commission. I don't necessarily want to list them by name, but I believe that if we do receive a document, part of the procedures will include us coordinating with our counterpart, or at least our contact at the AG's office, to identify if that particular document is a valid document that can be used to assert jurisdiction over us. So I don't want to say it's necessarily a case-by-case basis, but there are certain jurisdictions that would be pretty evident for those who are legally trained. And as I'm recognizing I am an attorney, but not licensed in the state of Wyoming, nor representing the state of Wyoming in any shape or form. However, I feel comfortable in deferring to the Attorney General's office to assess which courts has jurisdiction over the Wyoming Stable Token Commission.
Yeah, I just looked at the applicable law section there, and it says it goes down to code, and that would be like a county or city code. So I'm just, as we move forward, I want to, try to to make sure that we've got this buttoned up as tight as we can, so we don't have a special political interest group that decides to change a county regulation, and we can't do business in that county because of the regulation. You know, so those are the things that I'm concerned about, because we've got some active local governments in the state at this point in time, and I wouldn't want them to be actionable against the stable tokens. So that's just my, I guess, concern that I have. So I just want to make sure we can button some of this stuff up. Thank you.
Through the chair, I do appreciate that, and I will follow up with the Attorney General's office for further clarification. Thank you.
Go ahead, Commissioner Pope.
Thank you, Madam Chair. All right, so I only have really one suggested edit right now on this. Not saying I won't have more later on, but in Section 2 of Chapter 4, under responsibility, I think line 2 of A should read, subject to the initial approval from and ongoing review by the commission. Just that preserves our authority later on.
Understood. Thank you.
And through the chair, this is still, we're not looking to approve this, so anything that we get verbal assent on, we're happy to take that back and just plug it in. Any other questions on Chapter 4? Okay. Moving on to Chapter 5, again, similar to the last and more technically focused one. This one's a bit brief. This is really compelling the agency to create procedures around the methods by which it deploys and upgrades smart contracts, blockchain-related software, et cetera, and the manner in which we may launch on a new blockchain network. So again, there are several candidate blockchains already kind of working on that, but in the future, as we scale, if the commission wants to have any kind of oversight or specific steps need to be followed to do that, in addition to the blockchain selection criteria, we can certainly assess that. And then the director or commission staff will implement change management procedures and a version control system to make sure that, again, first of all, we have an audit trail of our code, but also if in case anything, for whatever reason, goes sideways, you could always kind of just roll back to the prior version.
Just be thinking a little bit here. I would assume that all the local jurisdictions are subject to the Unified Commercial Code or the Uniform Commercial Code. So I might be seeing something. I might be seeing something that goes bump in the night in that regard, because they may not be able to affect, the local ones might not be able to affect anything we're doing. So, but maybe some clarification that there is that hierarchy, from the AG would ease my concerns.
Through the chair, Commissioner Meyer, we'll add that to the stack. Happy to ask.
Okay, on Chapter 5, before we finish that, one of the big topics in the audit world right now is smart contracts, and that what you already mentioned, audit trails, and my desire is to see wording around making sure we have internal and external audit expectations on the smart contract side, and the ability for any smart contract to be auditable. And you kind of work around the issue in this, but it's not addressed directly.
Through the chair, Commissioner Pope, excellent point. I will note that, I don't want to delve again too much into the active contracting, but we did speak a little bit earlier about who's still on the docket for us. There's internal controls, there's the financial audit and attestation. Both of those teams are they scored highly on our evaluation criteria because they are so familiar with this industry and have worked specifically on stablecoins before. So I would expect that whatever we need in terms of guidance from them, we will be getting. Again, guidance, we'll put guidance in asterisks because audit function is one thing versus advisory work, as you and I both know. But that is certainly something we can address. Any other questions on Chapter 5? Okay, wrapping up to Chapter 6, and again, I might tag Deb in on the tail end of this, but this is management of other digital assets. There's a quick section here where the Director of Commission staff shall create a policy regarding the payment of gas fees for stable token transactions. Again, we've covered that a little bit earlier in terms of the authority to go and get digital assets, so buy some Ethereum, buy some Solana, so we could power the transactions that we're actually going to be performing and doing ourselves. But the bigger chunk here is what we call unsolicited assets. So as you saw from the demonstrations we did, one of the things I called out along the way was that our smart contract is publicly visible. That's a good thing. We want it to be open source. People will have confidence they can take a look at the code, that they can see the functions are working as appropriate, and that is great. The other side of that is they will be able to see our wallets, the commission's wallets by which we are sending out the tokens. So one of the things that happens in the digital asset space is people will, from time to time, send assets to those wallet addresses. Sometimes it's done out of the kindness of people's hearts. They like a project, they want to send some funding to it, and they will just go ahead and do so. We need a path to address what that looks like, and I'll double back to that in a second. There's also a more malicious side of that where someone who is less scrupulous and maybe has a wallet that is one of these OFAC tagged wallets or whatnot can start sending assets to anyone. So we need ways to segregate those assets that may come from unknown parties and figure out what we're going to do with them. So if these are, people who we can get an idea of who this person is, maybe it's a donation, that's more of a statutory call. That's something that I brought up during the meeting with the select committee during the interim session about donations. I'm aware that many agencies are able to take donations just via statute, provided that it gets dedicated to one particular fund, right? For us, it's a pretty easy call, I would think, which is we have the liquidity fund account meant to over-collateralize our reserves. Anything that comes in that we can prove is from someone who is KYC'd or what have you, we could liquidate those funds, put that into the liquidity fund account, and use that donation to further bolster our reserves and over-collateralization. If there is a less scrupulous party, that is where we will coordinate with, this is Romanet 2, we will coordinate with appropriate law enforcement agency for instructions on the appropriate treatment and disposition of digital assets or cryptocurrency received. So that's kind of the legal side of things. And the technical side of things, I'll mention that Fireblocks, who again, we've engaged for all of our technical infrastructure, or not all of it, but a good chunk of the technical infrastructure, does have a mechanism by which they can automatically segregate those funds that come in and we don't know where they're from until we figure out what to do with them. So again, that's the high level version of this. Again, Deb is on screen. So through the chair, I would ask and recognize Ms. Brooks.
Thank you, Director Apollo. I just want to highlight that with a small staff and recognizing the business plan is to not engage directly with the retail population or consumer base, instead relying on middle persons to support the WISC token. One of the challenges that we face is a unsolicited asset, particularly a misdirected transfer, Romanet 3, where whether intentional or not, they may seek a request to have that monies or that crypto asset returned to them. The challenge, of course, is with a very limited compliance team in place, we would have to, on a practical level, onboard that person as a customer, have that person KYC'd. And then at that point, when we are satisfied that that individual or entity is not a malicious actor and the source of that digital asset is legitimate, then we would consider returning that. Of course, we don't have that capability or systems in place. And particularly, we would not have the although we could have the capability to return it, the process by which that I explained to, before we can even consider returning the digital assets, is something that the staff is unable to do at this time. So we put together this particular section to really alert the world that there may be a possibility, but because of the staffing constraints, that is a possibility that may not be practicable. Thanks, Anthony.
Thank you, Ms. Brooks. Any questions on Chapter 6?
Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Commissioner Wallace.
I'm not sure this really applies, but I guess as we're talking through this, do we have anything in place to prevent like what's happened with like Evolve and the Synops situation, you know, where our licensed service providers are out mismanaging or not accounting for these appropriately, and then it's gonna come back on us?
That, through the chair, that is an excellent question, Commissioner Wallace. Short answer is no, and then I'll do what I typically do and give a longer answer, which 90% of which is hopefully applicable. So in terms, there's two ways to think about this. One is in terms of the technology, and the other is in terms of the actual funds. So in terms of the technology, despite the fact that we have Fireblocks helping us stand up vaults and wallets and all of this, they're not in control at the end of the day. When we do the final handover and we launch this Wyoming stable tokens, we're the only ones in charge of the keys, right? So there's no opportunity for them to even touch things. And we've even seen that, you know, the chairman has mentioned gates in the past, making sure we have controls over the issuance and the movement of tokens. And we've even had a couple situations where through our testing, as we've provisioned access to our team and move things off of, let's say, Fireblocks, if we have a question for them, there's times where they can't, you know, they'll have to say like, well, we can't do that on your behalf. You need to take that step because we're the only ones in charge of it. You literally, just because of the way we have the keys and they don't, to do things on chain, they can't move things around on our behalf. That's the technology side. Layer 0 is very much the same. When they deploy the smart contracts, those will be transitioned to us from a private key perspective, so we're the ones in charge. From the financial side, I would hope that Franklin Advisors is a bit more scrupulous than some of these novel fintechs. But what I think is important for us is we are looking to accomplish, hopefully by the end of this year, real-time attestation. So people will be able to see that this much money is in reserves, maybe every 10 or 30 seconds, and this many stable tokens are outstanding. So if funds start going away and we break that one-to-one backing, we'll know immediately through some of the monitoring that we have in real time. We'll be alerted via messages, Slack, email, texts, whatever it happens to be. And we can address it if we need to, pull on one of these switches that we're talking about in this rule set where there's emergencies or incident responses and we need to kind of pause things. We'll have the rule-based ability to do so and the technical ability to do so. Hopefully that answers the question. 90% of the way there?
Yeah, no, I think so. I think a lot of it, like you said, comes down to the custodian and the controls we have over them. So yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, well, if there are no other questions.
Chair. I don't think Director Apollo truly expected to get past this section without one comment from me. As we look at the possibility of donations in the future, that will require a certain amount of rewrite of whatever control document we also have in order to address things like restricted donations and unrestricted donations and whether additional accounts and trust designations need to be created for those too. So it's a little bit more complex, and right now it looks to me like you really don't address donations because it's not anticipated that we're able to take donations right now. So in the future, that will be an issue.
So quickly through the chair, Commissioner Pope, in just a minute, we'll get to the letter we received from the Select Committee, and I'll provide a little bit more context when we talk then. Any remaining questions? Anyone online? Okay. So again, the goal is not to approve the set of rules today. We'll look to do that at our August 4th meeting. But I think we've got a small number of tweaks, a couple double checks, but we'd look for any feedback from the commission as soon as practicable and look to move forward and approve this the morning of the 4th, which is a Monday. So I will throw that out there. Moving on to the last section here. Well, it's not the last document. What you have next in front of you is the July 2025 Policy Update Memo. So, pardon me. Last month, we went through, again, kind of the inventory of documents that are in front of us. This memo looks very much the same, in which we go through what these documents are, what they're meant to accomplish, any kind of notes I wanted to bring up. Again, the goal is not to approve anything today, but to get that done on the August 4th meeting. But this will be kind of our guide through all the documents that sit behind it, which is the big stack of paper you have remaining in your folders. So what I'd like to do is just get right on into it. The first thing, even before we get into the terms of service and user agreement, is the letter that the commission received from the Select Committee on Blockchain, Financial Technology, and Digital Innovation Technology, signed by the co-chairs, Representative Daniel Singh and Senator Christopher Rothfuss. This is in response to my testimony from the May 4th interim meeting, and I'll also add there was additional commentary from Commissioner Naves in that discussion, as well as Commissioner Pope. This essentially gives three pieces of encouragement. The first is to affirm that the Wyoming stable token may be used for any lawful purpose under Wyoming and federal law. And when we get into the user agreement, we'll see the impact of that. And then we did highlight during the last meeting and now has kind of been reflected in that document. The second is to continue exploration of privacy-preserving technologies that balance user confidentiality with lawful oversight, such as zero-knowledge proofs and homomorphic encryption. We do have a privacy policy we'll go through later. I don't think this one really has a kind of material effect or knock-on, but just wanted to call that out as well, because I do know we care quite a bit about privacy in the state. And then the final one is to explore a compliant, yield-bearing design that may promote broader adoption and enhance the net benefit to the people of Wyoming. So, and I'll add kind of the last line under all of those is we believe that all of these recommendations are consistent with and achievable within existing legislative authority. So with all of that said, I will state that there is a bit of a delta between the legislature and their representation from the Legislative Services Office and our agency and our representation from the Attorney General's office. So all that say is if we were to, on this last bullet point, pursue a yield-bearing stable token, there may be different opinions, and that's not something that we're looking to do on day one, but that is an exploration, I said here, that we have started and will continue to do. And not in this document, but just on the back of what Commissioner Pope mentioned, and again, these are LSO documents, so I'm not putting them into our form, they're not ours to share. I will quickly mention that I have received 2 documents from LSO regarding updates to statute pertaining to digital assets. One is a broader update to token taxonomy. Obviously, this state has been at the forefront, continues to be on the forefront of all things digital asset related. What that does mean on the converse side is there are some definitions on the books that we've highlighted. Commissioner Pope, you've mentioned things like consumable or assets, or I think there's another word I'm thinking of, but there's been language drafted in statute that hasn't really been used, nor has that been the direction that industry has gone, nor the federal level has gone with things like the Genius Act or what we're seeing in the Clarity Act. So what will happen with LSOs, I'm assuming there will be a bill to kind of bring our statute more in line with what industry in DC has adopted, but also maintain some of the special things that we've done in the state that they're not perhaps considering at the federal level. Second document I have received is amendments to the Stable Token Act. Again, not entirely sure how much we want to go into that in this forum, but what I will say, it's reflective of the conversation we're having now around how some of these funds come in terms of donations. And I'll also mention that there was several pieces of feedback from ourselves and supplemented by input from the Treasurer's Office around fund structure. how we can make things perhaps fit into a compliance wrapper so we can get something akin to like an SEC report at the click of a button from our investment management partners, and other thoughts around the basket of permitted investments, whether that needs to be changed for a yield-bearing stable token, how that would work if, and this is all things I mentioned in my public testimony in May, if we are dealing with an interest rate below 2%, how do we collateralize up to 2%? If interest rates are negative, can we avail ourselves of other instruments to make sure that this is still, not making boku bucks necessarily, but still can float the cost of the program and make sure we're establishing a strong buffer and a strong reserve. Any questions on the letter from the Select Committee? Okay, so we will move on to the user agreement. Again, you saw a copy of this last time at a very high level. We will go through it in more detail this time. So first things first, we do have our definitions, will be the first section. I'm not going to go through all of them. A couple I want to point out. One is the first definition here is applicable laws. We talk about things like the BSA, AML, sanction laws, and just delineating between where that's applicable to us versus a licensed service provider. And Commissioner Wallace, I think this goes back to the question you asked at the end of our last meeting about how these kind of frameworks fit into what it is we're doing, and this is essentially the answer. Same thing with the next on page 2, Bank Secrecy Act and anti-money laundering. How that all fit in, we'll see in a moment. Same thing with prohibited users, people on the OFAC, specially designated nationals list, blocked persons list are not people who will be distributing Wyoming stable tokens to, and there'll be controls in place to make sure they do not receive them. And then I think we would move on to the terms applicable to licensed service providers. Again, as Ms. Brooks pointed out just a few minutes ago, we are not distributing Wyoming stable tokens directly to an end user. We're not DTC. We are leveraging the services of licensed service providers, which might be centralized exchanges, digital wallets, payment providers, market makers. We'll be working with them, performing know your business checks, KYB, to make sure that they've got their controls and their licensure in place that would allow them to distribute a Wyoming stable token. So this section, again, is specific to those LSPs. And then, Commissioner Meyer, to your point on the bottom of page 4, item 6, Romanet 1, exchange fees. We're not, again, our intent is not to put fees in this out the gate, but this is a option that we're preserving with the statement the commission may assess any exchange fees in a manner consistent with the terms and will disclose such fees to licensed service providers at the time of the transaction, right? So again, perhaps rather than, similar as I just said a moment ago, if we're dealing with a situation where interest rates drop precipitously, we have a negative interest rate, perhaps we can pull on that lever as a way to continue generating revenues for the state and for the program. Then section 3 is the terms applicable to all users of Wyoming stable tokens. Eligibility, by possessing WIST, you represent and warrant that you are at least 18 years old. There is a good excuse for that being there, which I can't remember off the top of my head. I will defer to Ms. Brooks or Commissioner Navas on that, because I know we talked about that. And I think that's one that if you see in a vacuum may be a little bit of an eyebrow raiser. So I want to come back to that. But this essentially binds any user to the terms we're putting forward, any other applicable documents or laws. And again, states that prohibited users, these people on the nefarious actors lists, are not able to use these things. Before we move on to the next section, again, Deb or Commissioner Navas, if you wanted to just speak briefly to the whole 18-year-old thing, which I believe is downstream of, again, the LSP relationships, but some additional context there might be illuminating.
Thank you, Director Apollo. The 18-year-old, again, is something that we can discuss with the Attorney General's office, but generally certain licensed service providers traditionally may request an age limit of 18 years or older. Some jurisdictions do require to have access to financial products at the age of 18, but that's as we're going through the process and going through draft iterations, we can shore that up, Director.
Thank you. Okay, we'll keep moving through this again. I know there's a lot of content to get through, so please, if anyone has a question, just feel free to interrupt me. In terms of some of these other sections, we have sovereign immunity as section 2. We have, and I'm jumping around a little bit here, on section 12 is indemnification, section 13 is limitation on liability. These are all things that preserve our sovereign immunity as a state. We can't waive that. So we want to make sure that all of that is embedded in here, and you'll see that throughout. Governing law and jurisdiction, saying everything will take place in the state of Wyoming. Insurance, we don't have insurance on this. It's not backed by the full faith and credit of the state. Application of the Uniform Commercial Code, again, Commissioner Meyer, you brought up the UCC a few minutes ago. This is essentially a proactive opt-in to Article 8 of the UCC, which treats Wyoming stable tokens as securities under Article 8. It does not determine the characterization or treatment of such property under any other law or rule, including without limitation, U.S. federal or state securities laws. So that's a little bit of a carve out there. And then the one I want to spend a moment on here is prohibited actions. So again, if you look at the terms of existing incumbent stablecoin issuers, there's a fairly lengthy list of prohibitive actions, some of which are obvious, right? Don't use it in like ransoms, which is obviously a list to begin with, but some of them are kind of in a gray zone, right? So again, Circle it prohibits you from using USDC in the purchase of firearms, can't buy prescription medicine, can't use it to pay your taxes, which we have a specific carve out in the state of Wyoming saying we want people to pay for their taxes with crypto. So on the back of the letter from the state legislature and the select committee thereof, this has been greatly reduced in scope to essentially say, you can't be a prohibited user, you can't violate laws. Other than that, it's any lawful use. One important carve out, and I'll mention, Commissioner Navas has mentioned this in a number of conversations that we did add, was that nothing herein precludes licensed service providers from implementing prohibited actions consistent with applicable laws, regulations, or contractual obligations. So what we're doing with that is we're delineating between what's applicable to Wyoming as a state and the issuer of Wyoming stable tokens and what might be applicable to a licensed service provider. We don't want to ask them to do something that is outside their remit, right? So, that will be a bit of a split in how things might be handled by us versus an LSP, but we want to respect their autonomy. We're not asking them to jeopardize any of their licenses. So that's how that's been
Our
drafted.
licensed service providers would have to, I guess, notify us that they're not being able to buy firearms or pay their taxes or anything else.
So through the chair, Commissioner Meyer, that's something that if it's not, I don't know off the top of my head, but if it's not in the KYB requirements that we'll go through next, we can certainly put that in there in regards to any, do you have any prohibitions on what you're able to do, right?
Yeah.
And that's going to
It'd be
be,
good to know that, because if we're advertising one thing and we can't provide that because our licensed service providers, unless it's in the state of Wyoming, then we got a little bit of a conundrum there.
a little bit of a schism. So we're happy to assess that in terms of the KYB, because we're collecting a lot of information there, and I think you'll see that when we go through that. We talk about forks, which is when a blockchain may kind of split, not retroactively. The history always remains the same, but going forward, a blockchain may go through a bit of a change. For example, back in 2015, Ethereum split into what is now known as Ethereum Classic, which remained a proof of work network, and then Ethereum as we know it now. And if that happens, we can't have Wyoming stable tokens on both of them going forward, because then you are essentially double counting and you're going to break your one-to-one backing. So we'll need to pick a chain, and this is our methodology for doing that. Can't assign the terms. It's pretty straightforward. We talk about third-party interactions. We don't have control over blockchain networks, so we're not responsible for that. We talked about indemnification and release. We talked about limitation on liability vis-a-vis sovereign immunity. We'll have a support email address. We'll probably get a dedicated one from ETS to accomplish that, so we'll plug that in there. In terms of taxes, everyone's responsible for paying their own taxes. We're not in charge of the tax code, although we certainly have some ideas from before. And then we have the right to amend these terms at any time. So one of the things I'll mention is that this user agreement will live on our website, but it will also be embedded, at least a link to these terms will be embedded in the token metadata in real time, right? So anyone who's handling a Wyoming staple token by virtue of doing so is going to be bound by the terms in this user agreement. Before I take any questions, I will once again ask if Ms. Brooks has anything that I missed. I know that a lot of work has gone into this. I don't want to skip over anything that might be worth calling out.
No additional points to add, Director. Thank you.
Excellent. Then I will ask the commissioners if they have any questions.
Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
You know, I hate to even ask this question, but as a user agreement, 11 pages long is probably the shortest user agreement that's living on the internet these days. So are we missing something here, or why is this as concise as it is?
Well, through the chair, Commissioner Wallace, I think we've hit all the things. Well, there's a couple of things. One is I think we've hit the marks we need to hit. And if you go through this and you think that there's things that we're missing, would love to be made aware of that. This is, based on a lot of research that Deb and the team has done into the existing user agreements. But for example, if you look at, again, going back to Circle, not to pick on them, but they're a public company, they're doing quite well, so I might as well. Their terms are longer because they have lengthy sections on restricted activities and lengthy sections on prohibited transactions. We're coming at this from a different angle where we're saying if it's a lawful use of the token, you can use it. So that would be about 2 or 3 pages long. That also being said, we're supplementing this with a privacy policy, risk disclosures. Those are different documents we'll get to momentarily, and risk disclosures typically are considered to be part of a user agreement. We've split them out. They're meant to travel together, but they can be also their own separate things. 6 one way, half a dozen the other. But there's plenty more paper where this came from this morning.
Yeah, I guess the question is, do we have our hold harmless and indemnify language in here?
Yes, we do.
Okay, good.
Again, that's sections 12 and 13.
Okay.
And Commissioner Wallace, for whatever it's worth, I know this says page X of 1 throughout the whole document. It does say page X of 11 on Google Drive. Not sure what happened, but get there. Any other questions? Okay. Moving on to the know your business requirements for licensed service providers. So essentially, this is one of 2 documents we'll need to send to the LSPs in terms of getting them on board. So you can't just start buying Wyoming stable tokens from us because you want them. We need to make sure that you have all of your compliance in place. And that's what this document is meant to accomplish and accommodate. So introduction is a lot of preamble that this commission is well familiar with about what it is that we're doing. I will add that section 1.7 does define or give examples of some of the types of licensed service providers, so centralized exchanges, payment platforms, software integrations, market makers. Those are all called out here. When we go to section 2, and that's establishing relationships with LSPs, this is a much longer section, and we break up the collection of information we need from them across multiple subsections. So the first is LSP identification. This is all of the information we need about the corporate body itself. So things like EIN, where you headquartered, your articles of incorporation or articles of organization, depending on your structure, management charts, all that good stuff is captured here. A certificate of good standing, copy of your AML program, financial statements, proof of funds, so we know that people who want to buy stable tokens actually have the money to do so, control person information, director information, and it goes on. It's further bolstered by our own due diligence, which is the commission will conduct due diligence on LSPs through the following steps. That includes, again, looking at who the beneficial owners, control persons are, understanding the customer base of any given LSP, looking at the licensure they have to operate in their jurisdiction, looking at their own BSA and OFAC compliance, and looking at things like the number of suspicious activity reports they file and whatnot. Goes on from there. Then we get into different flavors of enhanced due diligence. So there is in section 2.4, enhanced due diligence for foreign LSPs. If we need to understand what jurisdictions they're under and get our heads around that, this is the mechanism by which we do that. We also incorporate standards from the Financial Action Task Force, or FATF. That's in that section. If there's increased risk determination, regardless of where you're domiciled, there's a carve out for that, including things like the LSP's exposure to illicit activity on the blockchain compared to market standards, who the ultimate beneficial owners are, et cetera. And then at the commission's determination, if they want to do additional due diligence, we look at the source of funds. We might even run our own blockchain analytics through our on-chain analytics providers, and then look at any indicators of financial instability. That is not a one-time exercise. In section 2.7, we talk about the ongoing monitoring of LSPs and what that would include. So this is not, again, not a one-time deal. We'll keep revisiting that, and that's part of the periodic reviews in section 2.8. Then we have this last section, 2.9, is documenting the rights and responsibilities in written agreements. So again, this states that we will have to enter into an agreement with a given LSP, which is the next document we'll look at, and take it from there. So that's a lot in one place, but again, would offer through the chair to recognize Ms. Brooks for anything I may have glossed over in that speed read, and then turn it over to the commission for any questions.
Thank you, Director. Nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay. Anything from the commission?
And again, Director, your desire would be for us to really comb through these over the next
Couple weeks.
2 weeks and get you any concerns, preferably before the meeting, but by then.
That would be it, Madam Chairman. Hearing no questions, we'll go on to the boilerplate contract between the Wyoming Stable Token Commission and the LSP. Candidly, I have not combed through this one myself with a fine-tooth comb. I might turn it over to Ms. Brooks to talk through the parts that are bespoke to the LSP agreement. What I will call out myself is that this would be, to be clear, a contractual agreement between the Stable Token Commission and the LSP. So what I'm certainly familiar with in this document is a number of the provisions, in general provisions, which is section 21, some sections before that, where we are essentially incorporating the general provisions of a Wyoming state contract into this agreement, in addition to all of the focal pieces around the LSP itself. So Ms. Brooks, if you'd be so kind, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Director. Providing a high level, this contract is very extensive. Presently, we're looking at over 30 pages. And maybe counting, or we may weed out. So I just wanted to flag that for the commissioners. Probably our lengthiest of papers that you will see from us, at least for the next couple of weeks for your review. The first 4 sections, and I'll just go at a very high level. The first 4 sections identifies the parties, the purpose of the contract, the term of the contract. Section 5 is identifying the services. It's essentially, we're selling WIS to you. You in turn will give us money, and how that money will be reserved, meaning the timeframes. If you make the request before, within business hours, we can promptly respond. But if you do it off business hours, those are the consequences of providing requests during on and off business hours. Section 6 is fees and taxes. You provide an invoice, we may pay. Director Apollo indicated previously that although we may not be charging fees at this present time, we just want that flexibility in case we do decide to charge fees to the licensed service providers. And want also to highlight within Section 6, taxes, everyone pays their own taxes. Section 7, representations and warranties, just for concerns. We may make some changes to the warranties on that particular section, so I want to just touch on it just a little bit. We do have Section 8 dealing with the banks and third parties. Again, we are in discussions, or at least we are in discussions with the AG's office, so there may be some changes to that. But chapter or Section 9, compliance policies and procedures. Again, similar to what you've seen in the user agreement, that the licensed service providers will abide by applicable laws. Of course, they do have that, but they must abide by the rules of their own jurisdictions as well. Again, the licensed service provider within that section, and particularly 9.5 on page 10, discuss the sanctions and really a warrant that they will not engage with bad actors, anyone that's on any bad acting list, and there are consequences if they do engage on our part, meaning we can up to and including canceling or terminating the agreement. I'm going to skip over Section 10, which really discusses the intellectual property trademark. Section 11 deals with the confidentiality provision. You don't share information generally. Chapter 12 or Section 12 deals with data privacy and security. In the event of a data breach, for example, there will be a notification to us. Section 13, termination of contracts. Obviously, there are buckets within that section that the contract could be terminated from a mutual decision on both ourselves as well as the licensed service provider, to if the licensed service provider defaults or violates the terms of use, including we discover they, for example, may engage extensively with a sanctioned entity. Section 14 deals with liabilities. I'll just go over that. I'll skip over that quickly to Section 15 that discusses indemnification clauses. Again, I mentioned it's pretty robust agreement. Section 16 highlights the risk disclosures and risk factors that the agency, of course, we don't control, and neither does the contract. The licensed service provider acknowledges that they don't control what happens on the networks or the blockchains that are supported by the commission, and the other identifying the potential risk, including forks on the blockchain, as Director of Apollo identified. And of course, the important chapter or section for the commission is the sovereign immunity and venue. We wanted to ensure that the state of Wyoming is secure, and the terms of use identifies that the state is immune, and choice of law is state of Wyoming, and the venue is also. If there is some form of litigation, it has to be within the state of Wyoming. Section 18 discusses the Uniform Commercial Code that Director Apollo discussed. I won't repeat it here. Section 19 is the traditional insurance requirements that appears to be standard in other contracts that we have engaged in. And lastly is Section 21, which is the miscellaneous section, which goes over if there's amendments to the contract, assignments, any complaints, conflicts of law, ethics, force majeure, and so on. So I will pause to see if the commissioners have any questions, or if the director has any questions. And I apologize in advance for going on 35 or 38 pages, but I wanted to try to be as robust as possible, but not put the commission to sleep.
16.4, irreversible transactions. How does that relate to temporary holds or freezing or anything like that, or burning, or I'm just, if you could, characterize what an irreversible transaction, would be in light of these other things that we have to do from time to time, or could have to do.
So through the chair, Commissioner Meyer and Ms. Brooks, I'm happy to take that one because this is maybe getting into the technical as well as the legal. So the way we have this written is the agency does not have the ability to reverse or recall any transaction that occurs on a blockchain network, including supported networks, once initiated. So what that means is if Commissioner Meyer tries to send some Wyoming stable tokens to Madam Chairman, in the middle of that transaction, we can't do anything to stop that. And then once,
But you can basically rewind it.
well, this is where we get into the legal side of things, right? We're not able to do that unless it's, again, going back to the token management policy we talked about, interdiction. It's got to be downstream of a valid court order, right? So if you fat finger a transaction, there's nothing we could do about that. We're only getting in there if it's, warrants and things like that.
So if we didn't fat finger it, but somebody else did, then that's just what happened, and then they have to, that's between the two parties, not us.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Yeah.
Because the issue there is perhaps if we wanted to do something, like that, out of the goodness of our hearts, scale, that's a manual exercise for our team. Scale that to several million users who fat finger dollar transactions. That becomes almost like an attack vector for the commission. And also, again, just generally speaking, from a philosophical standpoint, we probably shouldn't be touching other people's transactions unless, again, there's illicit activity.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
And Ms. Brooks, I did not have any questions for you on that. I think this is a very substantive document, and again, one that we will be focused on, and even getting some, we'll start circulating that even ahead of formal approval. We'll get a draft copy in front of some of the LSPs to get their feedback as well. Because if there's anything from, what I don't want to do is have the commission go through all of this and approve everything to send it to LSPs, and then only a final copy to LSPs, and to have, a line in there that breaks it for 90% of them. So we'll get some industry feedback on this as well. Any other questions on this? Okay. Keeping an eye on the clock with about 10 minutes left, the next document we can kind of just pass over quickly. These are the defined terms from the boilerplate contract. Nothing really for us to do here, but every page of the LSP agreement does say in big highlighted bold letters, the list of defined terms is located here. So you have them. It's more of a glossary than anything else. The next substantive document you have in front of you is the privacy policy, which is 3 pages. I don't know how much time we want to spend on this one because this is really downstream of existing rules or guidance from both the Attorney General's office, which has a privacy policy in place, as well as some context in here from the Enterprise Technology Services team and what they require from us. So we don't, so for example, just to kind of kick off with this first one, information collection practices, we're not collecting information on individual end users. That's where we're relying on licensed service providers to do the KYC and the AML. We're not gathering that data. We're not storing that data. We may have non-PII, such as on-chain addresses associated with user transactions, which is essentially using those, if you saw earlier, what we call 0x addresses for Ethereum-based or EVM-based blockchains. That's kind of your identifier. Those are functionally pseudo-anonymous. So we might get that, and we will get that because we're going to be monitoring the transactions for any kind of nefarious use, but that's not your name, your address, your bank account, et cetera. Again, so for use and disclosure information, used primarily for law enforcement purposes or other legal actions. Again, we're not trying to grab data to sell it, right? We're trying to make sure that we get the minimum amount possible because we have a higher standard of collecting data than, let's say, a private company does. We don't take enforcement actions absent a legal order. The retention schedule, again, that's where the ETS comes in. We are meeting with the archival team on a number of different things. We are set up on the state's content management system. So anything that needs to be retained can be retained, although again, that's mostly applicable to our own documents and not those of individual user transactions. In terms of any incident, any information about that is maintained for 10 years. We can change this policy, and again, this is one that we'd expect to travel with the token as part of the token's metadata. Any questions on the privacy policy? Hearing none, with 8 minutes left now, we will move on to the risk disclosures addendum. To Commissioner Wallace's earlier question, this is something that's meant to travel with the terms. You can see that it is, in this first line, incorporated into and made part of the Wyoming stable token terms of service. We call out a couple of things here. The market price of Wyoming stable tokens may fluctuate. Again, we do have a number of controls in place, and we do have the liquidity fund account that is meant to mitigate against the risk of any kind of depeg, but again, it is a mitigant, not a guarantee. Reserves may be subject to liquidity risk. So again, this is where we start talking about things like the interest rate on the underlying treasuries. That's part of that consideration. You bear the risk of using Wyoming stable tokens on third-party platforms. So if you go and you start transacting with WIST on a less scrupulous platform that is not an LSP and we don't have any insider control over, that is on the end user. Commissioner Wallace, again, hitting the nail on the head. Reserves are held at or through financial institutions, which are subject to various risks. So we've called that out here as well. WIST is not legal tender. We're not required by law to be accepted as legal payment for goods or services. WIST holders may transfer, trade, hold, or use WIST only with persons that accept WIST. Right? We are not currency. And we don't have FDIC insurance or any other kind of analog abroad for that. Of course, there is technical risk if people start using this incorrectly, and risks that are also in front of us as well. Again, this is why we do things like code audits to make sure we don't have, to kind of mitigate against these risks. But again, mitigants are not guarantees. The Commission reserves the right to block and freeze address. We've talked about that freeze and seize policy, but that's here as well as a risk to the user. We may be subject to encumbrances, or WIST, not us, but the stable token itself may be subject to encumbrances. There's also legal and compliance risks. Legislative and regulatory changes may affect the use, transfer, and exchange of WIST. So again, we're seeing a lot of this activity in DC. Right now, it doesn't impact us, but we keep a close eye on these things to see if anything does, that we're aware of it and we react to it. And we do not provide any kind of tax advice, legal advice, or other professional advice. So again, a bit of a speed read. Any questions on the risk disclosures addendum? Okay. And then I think the final one, which I don't think we'll get through substantively in 6 minutes, is the accounting policy and procedures. I will quickly call out that some of the feedback we had on the reserves management rules was, again, they're not specifically applicable, not intended to be, they might be generally applicable, but we deferred in that commentary to a accounting policy procedures document. That is this document. We're not going to go through this section by section because we have all of 5 minutes left, but this essentially calls out the powers of the director and kind of repeats some of that, cites where we fit into the GASB structure, the Government Accounting Standards Board structure. Let's see, what else we got? Yeah, I'm just calling out specific, so there's specific GASB guidance around freezing and seizing tokens, burning tokens, intangible assets, and then we get into bank accounts. We call out the structure of our accounts, again, the trust account, the liquidity fund account, and the operational account. We talk about how we feed into the state's budget process. There's a couple of examples that our CFO, Joe Saldana, has added here about how these will look on a ledger. And we are happy to dig through this with any of the commissioners as they review this. Commissioner Pope, I know you have a couple comments. I will note we have about 3.5 minutes left. So going through as quick as we can.
Madam Chair? I will reserve comments till later, but I have a list of 25 questions that I'm going to send over to you that you and Joe are. And they're meant to be leading questions, but they're also asking for documentation on where within the document these things are located. So just to prepare you, I wish I could have gotten them to you earlier, and I apologize.
Well, Commissioner Pope, through the chair, thank you for taking a look at these. We will certainly be happy to triage those on our side. Please make sure you address that to Joe and CC myself. He will get to it post haste, and we will take it from there. Any other comments, questions on the accounting policy? Commissioner Pope, perhaps you could also CC the treasurer as well. So with that said, Madam Chairman, we are about at that time. What's left for us is just in terms of next steps, I think, all eyes on August 20th. We've got our work cut out for us, but predominantly we'll look to get all of these documents approved on the 4th. Hopefully the entire commission will be there. I think that is the case. We will, again, keep that one focused on any kind of feedback. We are more than happy to triage feedback directly on the way. I will note that you have access to these documents as pieces of paper and PDFs on the drive because they're shared, and with the quorum rules that apply to electronic documents as well, we can't share live docs. But what we'll do is for all of these, we will send each commissioner individually a series of Word docs. So that way you can give us your track changes, and directly to us, we avoid any kind of electronic quorum rules, and then our team will triage those over the next 2 weeks. Beyond that, upcoming meetings and events, we have the August 4th meeting. We have the Wyoming Blockchain Symposium from August 18th through 21st in Jackson Hole, again, at which point we do intend to launch. And then we will follow that up with our next regular meeting on August 29th. Madam Chairman, I'll defer to you on public comment, but I would say that if we do public comment, duration is limited to 3 minutes per speaking party or one question from an online participant. Speakers will be asked to provide their first name, last name, and affiliation for the public record. Decorum will be governed by the rules and standards of Management Council Policy 1803 and WS 164406.
In other words, be nice and short. Yes, I will move into public comment. I'll go to the room first. Is there any public comment in the room? Hearing none. Stephanie, do we have anyone interested in providing comment online? Okay, is it someone verbally, or are they just submitting? Okay, I'll wait another 15, 20 seconds. What's that? You can, yeah, go ahead. Oh, it looks like their hand's back up. Hi there, if you could identify yourself, first and last name, and provide us with your comment.
Yes, thank you. Margaret Wisniewski. I'm a citizen here in Sheridan, Wyoming. Question, June 19th, the federal government approved the Genius Act. And Director Apollo, you kind of mentioned that briefly. How is this not in compliance, or actually maybe competition with the Genius Act? Can you comment on that?
Through the chair,
Director.
thank you for your comment and for tagging in. So in terms of the Genius Act, which again is the Senate's version of a stablecoin bill that is now
Yes, sir.
being in front of Congress, for us, we see ourselves outside of that because the way that they define an issuer within the context of the Genius Act is through the definition of a person. And if you were to look at the definition of a person in the Genius Act, banks, trusts, other business entities, we don't see ourselves as falling into that category. And if you were, I don't know if you caught the earlier part of the call, but I did mention this is part of the public testimony at the May 14th interim meeting of the Select Committee. a gentleman named Chris Land, who is Senator Lummis's general counsel, as well as the staff director of the Senate Banking Subcommittee on Digital Assets, did state in the public testimony that it is not the perspective that we are meant to be overseen by any of the policies of the Genius Act. It would actually kind of, to a certain extent, force a structure on the commission that's not how we would operate via state statute, and that would be its own can of worms. Also, I will note, again, the Genius Act has not passed yet. I was made aware, I think while we're sitting here, that vote might be happening in about 30 minutes, so we'll certainly keep eyes on that. And in terms of competition, the Genius Act doesn't create a CBDC or any kind of federal stablecoin or stable token. What it does is it creates parameters by which stablecoin issuers domestically must operate. So it gives them instructions to manage a fairly similar book of reserves as to what we have. There are other pieces that are similar, other pieces that are different, but all in all, we're a little bit outside the scope of the Genius Act, and I think I'll probably just leave it there.
Ms. Wisniewski, any additional comment?
Yes, sir. That's not quite clear, but yes, I do believe they are voting on it today. My second question, sir, is where are we getting the energy to support the WST?
So through the chair, Ms. Wisniewski, all of the candidate blockchains that are in scope for us use a mechanism for agreeing on the transactions called consensus. The consensus models for all of our candidate blockchains use something called proof of stake. A lot of the concerns in this industry around energy utilization come from a different model called proof of work. Proof of work is based on just raw computational energy being deployed. That's how Bitcoin works. But the transactions on these proof of stake networks are a fraction of energy that you would spend loading a YouTube video up on your phone.
Okay, so is Wyoming, are we responsible for the energy, or is the, I believe you referred to them as the LSP, is that right? Am I using the right term?
So through the chair, all I'd say is there's not a large energy utilization by anything we're doing. It's no different for us as to you browsing a website, is really how it works out. And any fees that would be associated with the transactions would be network fees. We saw earlier today that those are fractions of a cent. Those maybe if you're doing a more computationally intensive, you're trying to do a lot more with your transaction, that might be a couple of cents. We saw a transaction going from one chain to another that cost 3 cents, for example, but that fee would be assessed on the individual who's performing the transaction, not on the state in any capacity.
All right. And one more, sir, if you'd be so kind to humor me, please. You had mentioned, oh, where are my notes? Doggone it. My shorthand is not as good as it used to be. You had mentioned that you would like taxes to be paid. Oh, here we go. Okay, pay taxes with their crypto. Can you expand on that, please? Are you referring to commercial, private?
So through the chair, that is not the remit of this commission. That is a law on the books from the state legislature that goes back several years. I don't have the statute in front of me and the specific reference, but if you'd be so kind or wanted to connect over email, I'm more than happy to send that your way, where it is in statute now, as well as the bill in which it was passed.
Okay, I'll be in touch. Terrific. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wisniewski. Any other public comment from online?
I just maybe clarify is that not necessarily paying taxes with crypto, but paying taxes with the stable token, which is just a blockchain. So you're not paying taxes with Bitcoin. It actually gets turned into a representation of a U.S. Treasury note. So that's there's a lot of confusion that stable tokens are crypto. They're not crypto. They're essentially, they use the same technology, but they don't necessarily are, or they're not the same thing. One is essentially a US dollar, and crypto isn't a US dollar. It's traded on exchanges, and you can trade them for US dollars. But essentially, yeah, the stable tokens aren't crypto.
Okay. Anything further, Director?
Not for me, Madam Chairman.
All right, anything for the good of the order? I mentioned this to the director, and I'm not in charge of the meeting schedule, but I have mentioned that an hour on August 4th sounds really short and overly optimistic to approve 6 policies, a set of rules, and we will likely need to approve emergency rules for token management as well, because that process will just start the clock on August 1st or 4th, hopefully. And so I, just throwing that out for consideration. So if you have other meetings that day around that hour block, start clearing them.
Thank you, Madam
perhaps.
Chairman. We talked about going an hour earlier, totally fine for
Yes,
our
oh,
team.
yeah, yeah.
I have a note in
Great.
with the chairman's office, and once we confirm that, we will get that
Great.
done. And thank you for bringing that back up. I'd meant to mention that as we wrapped up, but we're already a few minutes over, so
Perfect.
thank you.
Don't start before 8:15 because I need 15 minutes to organize my office.
8:15. All right, with that, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 We are adjourned. Thank you.